Victoria Hale slammed her hand on the prosecution table so hard the water glasses spun toward the 19-year-old boy standing alone at the defense bench and said loud enough for every reporter in the room to hear, "Son, this is a federal courtroom, not a video game. Sit down before you embarrass your mother any more than you already have." The gallery laughed. The judge didn't stop them, and Angela Hayes in handcuffs lowered her head while her only child stood frozen in front of the woman who was about to send her to prison for 20 years. Before we go on, if you believe a mother deserves a son who won't give up on her, take 1 second and subscribe to this channel. Follow this story all the way to the end, because what this boy does in the final 10 minutes will leave you speechless. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from right now so I can see just how far this story travels tonight. The laughter didn't stop right away. It rolled through the gallery in waves, and Jordan Hayes felt each one hit him like cold water. He was still standing. He didn't sit down. Somewhere behind him, a man chuckled and muttered something about a kid playing lawyer, and a woman near the front covered her mouth with a program, and Victoria Hale let all of it happen. She wanted it to happen. She stood there with her arms crossed and a small smile on her lips, and she waited, because she knew that the longer the boy stayed on his feet without speaking, the more foolish he would look. Jordan felt his mother's eyes on the side of his face. He didn't turn to look at her. He couldn't. If he looked at Angela right now, if he saw the shame and the fear in her eyes, he would break, and he could not afford to break. Not here, not in front of this woman. "Mr. Hayes," Judge Robert Ellison said from the bench, and his voice was almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. "I'm going to ask you again. Do you understand what you're doing here?" "I understand, Your Honor," Jordan said. "I don't think you do," the judge said. "You've waived your right to court-appointed counsel. You've chosen to represent your mother yourself. Now, I admire loyalty. I do. But loyalty is not a law degree." The gallery liked that one. A few people actually clapped, until the judge tapped his gavel once softly, the way you'd quiet a room of friends, not a room where a woman's whole life was about to end. "Your Honor," Jordan said, and his voice cracked on the second word, and he hated it. He hated the sound of his own fear leaking out into the room. He cleared his throat and started again. "Your Honor, my mother has the right to counsel of her choosing. She chose me. That's her right." "It's her right to make a mistake," Victoria Hale said, not even standing, just leaning back in her chair and saying it to the ceiling. "Doesn't mean I have to feel bad about it." "Ms. Hale," the judge said, but there was no bite in it. "Withdrawn," she said, waving her hand already bored. Jordan Hayes was 19 years old. 8 months ago, he had been a sophomore at the University of Illinois at Chicago, studying computer science, quiet, a scholarship kid who ate lunch alone and did his homework 3 weeks early. He had a way of looking at a problem, any problem, a broken program, a locked door, a tangle of numbers, and seeing the shape underneath it, the pattern, the place where the logic bent. His professors called it a gift. His mother called it a blessing. His father, before he left when Jordan was 7, had called it strange, and that word had followed Jordan around for a long time. Then, 8 months ago, 2 federal agents had knocked on the door of the small apartment on the south side where Jordan had grown up, and they had taken his mother away in front of the neighbors. Angela Hayes was 44 years old. She worked in the laundry department of Mercy General Hospital, folding sheets and pushing carts of towels down long white hallways 6 days a week for 11 years. She had raised Jordan alone. She had never had a savings account with more than a few $100s in it. She did not own a computer. She used a flip phone because she said the touchscreens confused her, and she had never in her life sent a wire transfer because she did not know what one was. And she was being accused of masterminding a $200,000 wire fraud scheme. Jordan had dropped out of school the week after the arrest. He hadn't told his mother he was dropping out. He'd told her he was taking a semester off. She'd cried anyway in the visiting room at the detention center, cried and grabbed his hands through the little slot and told him to go back to finish, to not throw his life away for her. And Jordan had smiled at her and lied to her face and said he'd go back soon, and then he'd gone home and spread 3,000 pages of discovery documents across the floor of their apartment and started to read. He had been reading for 8 months. "Your Honor, if I may," Victoria Hale said, and now she stood smoothing the front of a suit that probably cost more than Angela made in a month. "I'd like to move things along. The defendant's son has made his little statement. We all appreciate the sentiment. Can we please get to the actual evidence? Ms. Hale, the judge said, you'll get your turn. With respect, Your Honor, I'd rather not spend the taxpayers' money watching a teenager discover how a courtroom works in real time. More laughter. Jordan gripped the edge of the defense table. His knuckles went pale. Here is a thing about Victoria Hale that the people laughing in that gallery did not know, and that Jordan Hayes did not know yet either. Her conviction rate was 98%. 98. In 14 years as a federal prosecutor, she had lost only a handful of cases, and she remembered every single one of them the way a shark remembers the one fish that got away. She did not lose. She had built her entire identity on not losing. She had passed on marriage, on children, on friendships, on sleep, on anything that got in the way of the number, and the number was 98, and she intended to make it higher. She had been given the Hayes case 11 months ago, and from the moment she'd read the file, she'd known two things. The first thing was that it was a slam dunk. A laundry worker with no lawyer, a paper trail that led straight to a bank account in her name, a jury that would look at a poor black woman from the South Side and see exactly what the prosecution wanted them to see. The second thing Victoria Hale had told no one, and she was counting on the fact that no one would ever find it out. Let's proceed, the judge said. Ms. Hale, call your first witness. And so it began. For the next 3 days, Jordan Hayes watched his mother's life get taken apart in front of him, one thread at a time, and there was almost nothing he could do to stop it. Victoria Hale was very, very good. He had to admit that even as he hated her, she built her case like a bricklayer patient, methodical, each brick fitting neatly on top of the last. She called a bank investigator who explained in slow, simple language for the jury how the $200,000 had moved. She called an FBI analyst who put charts on a screen, arrows pointing from one account to another, and every arrow seemed to end at Angela Hayes. She called Angela's own supervisor from the hospital, a nervous man named Delgado, who wouldn't meet Angela's eyes, and she walked him through the days Angela had missed work, framing each absence as a chance to commit a crime, instead of what it really was, a woman staying home with a migraine or a sick friend. And every time Jordan stood up to object, or to ask a question, or to introduce something of his own, Victoria Hale was ready. Objection, Your Honor. Foundation. Sustained. Objection. Hearsay. Sustained. Objection. The witness is not qualified to speak to that, and neither I'd note is defense counsel on account of not being counsel. Ms. Hale. Sustained, though. Sustained. Jordan lost track of how many times he heard that word. Sustained. It landed on him like a hand pushing him back down into his chair. He would rise, he would speak. He would get halfway through a sentence, and Hale would say a single word, and the judge would say, sustained, and Jordan would sit back down with the sentence still half-formed in his mouth. On the second day, he tried to introduce his evidence. He had it ready. He'd worked on it for months. It was the strongest thing he had, and he truly believed that if the jury could just see it, they would understand. Your Honor, he said, the defense would like to enter into evidence a set of server logs from the hospital's internal network. Victoria Hale turned around slowly in her chair. Server logs, she repeated. Yes, ma'am. They show that on the 3 dates the prosecution says my mother accessed the banking system to move money. The login came from an IP address that was not hers, that was not even in this state, and that, Your Honor, Hale said, standing, may I ask a question of defense counsel directly, since he's decided to be counsel? Briefly, the judge said. She turned to Jordan. Her voice was pleasant. That was the worst part. It was pleasant like a teacher talking to a small child. Mr. Hayes, do you have a degree in network forensics? No, but do you have any professional certification in computer security? Any certification at all? I was studying computer science before I had to. We're studying. So no, you dropped out of a community college, University of Illinois at Chicago. You dropped out of college, and now you'd like this jury to accept your personal interpretation of technical data that you, by your own admission, are not qualified to interpret. Is that a fair summary? Jordan felt his face go hot. The logs speak for themselves. Anyone can read a timestamp. It's just a number and a time. It doesn't take a degree to see that my mother couldn't have logged into a system from Ohio when she was standing in a hospital laundry room in Chicago. Objection. Hale said to the judge, turning her back on Jordan mid-sentence, dismissing him. The defendant's son is not a qualified expert. These logs have no authenticated chain of custody, no expert to interpret them, and no place in this courtroom. I move to exclude. Your Honor, please, Jordan said. Please. This is the whole case. This is... Mr. Hayes, the judge said, and he sighed, and he took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose like a tired man at the end of a long day. I want to help you, I do. But I can't let you put unauthenticated technical evidence in front of this jury with no expert to explain it. That's not me being unfair. That's the rules. If you'd accepted the court-appointed attorney, I couldn't trust them, Jordan said. It came out before he could stop it raw and too loud, and the whole room went quiet. The judge blinked. Excuse me. Jordan's heart was pounding. He knew he should stop. He didn't stop. The court-appointed attorney had 140 other cases, Your Honor. I looked it up. 140. He met with my mother for 11 minutes. 11 minutes, and then he told her to take a plea deal for 8 years. 8 years for something she didn't do. I couldn't trust him to fight, so I'm fighting. That's all. I'm just trying to fight for her because nobody else in this whole building will. The silence held for a moment, and then Victoria Hale laughed. It wasn't a big laugh. It was small and quiet, almost affectionate, and that was what made it so cruel. She laughed the way you laugh at a puppy that has tried to jump onto a couch too high for it. Oh, honey, she said, this isn't a movie. She turned to the jury, and she gave them a little smile, an inside joke, us grown-ups, and some of them smiled back. He's read some things on the internet, she said, gesturing at Jordan with an open hand. He's watched some legal dramas, and now he thinks he's found the loose thread that unravels the whole case. It's very sweet, it really is. But this is real law. Real law has rules, and the rule is you don't get to make things up because you love your mom. Objection? Jordan said, and his voice was shaking. That's not evidence. That's just her being... Sustained, the judge said, but he was looking at Jordan when he said it. The jury will disregard Ms. Hale's characterization, and Mr. Hayes, watch your tone. Jordan sat down. The server logs stayed out. The jury never saw them. That night, Jordan didn't go home. He couldn't. The apartment was too quiet, too full of his mother's things, her folded aprons and her reading glasses on the kitchen table, and the little wooden cross she kept by the sink. He couldn't be there without her. So he went to the only other place he had, the 24-hour study library at the university that hadn't yet formally kicked him out, and he sat down in a carrel in the basement level under a flickering fluorescent light, and he spread the discovery documents out again, and he read. He read the way a drowning man reaches for the surface. He didn't know what he was looking for. He only knew that it was there. Somewhere in these 3,000 pages, there was the shape of the truth, the pattern under the noise, and he had to find it before Friday, because on Friday, Victoria Hale would rest her case, and then it would be Jordan's turn, and he had nothing. He read federal statutes until the words blurred. He read case law he barely understood. He drank cold coffee from a machine down the hall, and he pressed his knuckles into his eyes, and he kept going, and at some point the clock on the wall said 2 a.m, and then it said 3. And at 3 a.m, Jordan Hayes saw it. It wasn't dramatic. It never is when you finally see the thing you've been staring past for months. It was one line in one document, a routine internal memo from the U.S. Attorney's Office, a procedural note about the seizure of Angela Hayes' assets. The government had frozen her bank account and put a lien on the apartment before the trial had even started standard civil forfeiture. The memo said nothing unusual. Except Jordan had over the last 8 months read a great many things about civil forfeiture, and he knew something now that he hadn't known before. He knew that there was supposed to be a review, a specific federal review, a checkpoint, a hearing where a judge was supposed to look at the seizure and decide whether it was proportional, whether it was constitutional, before the government took a poor woman's home away from her. And that hearing had never happened. Jordan sat very still under the flickering light. His heart was beating hard, but not from fear this time, from something else, something colder and clearer. He pulled out his phone, and he started to read the case that had been living in the back of his mind for weeks. Timms versus Indiana, 2019. The Supreme Court, all 9 of them unanimous, had ruled that the Eighth Amendment's protection against excessive fines applied to the states, that the government could not simply take everything a person owned as punishment, that there were limits, constitutional limits on this exact kind of seizure. The government had ignored those limits when they took his mother's home. That was the crack. That was the first crack. And Jordan, who had spent his whole life seeing the shape under the surface, felt the pattern begin to open up in front of him like a door. He didn't stop there. He couldn't have stopped there if he'd tried. He went back into the discovery. But now he wasn't reading it like a defendant's son anymore. He was reading it like a man who had found one lie and was certain there were more. Because that was the other thing Jordan understood about patterns. Lies don't come alone. If the government had cut a corner on the seizure, if they'd skipped a step they were supposed to take, then they had skipped it because they were in a hurry, and people got in a hurry when they were hiding something. So what were they hiding? He read until the sun came up. He read the emails. There were thousands of them dumped into discovery in no particular order, the way prosecutors sometimes do, burying the important pages inside a mountain of nothing so that no one will ever have the time or the will to dig them out. It's a legal trick. It's technically compliance. You gave the defense everything, didn't you? You just gave it to them the way you'd hide a needle in a truckload of hay. But Jordan Hayes had nothing but time, and he had nothing but will, and he had a mind built for exactly this. He read every email. He built a timeline in a cheap spiral notebook, dates and names, and he watched the pattern grow. And on the morning of the 4th day in the basement of the library, Jordan Hayes found the needle. It was an email. It had been sent 11 months ago, before Victoria Hale had even filed charges. It was from a man named Raymond Okafor, an IT technician who worked for the City of Chicago's Data Services Division. It was addressed to the FBI's field office, and it was copied to the U.S. Attorney's Office, and it was copied specifically to one address, Victoria.Hale. Jordan read the email 3 times, then a 4th. His hands were shaking again, but it was a different kind of shaking now. The email was short. Raymond Okafor, the IT technician, had written to say that he had completed his forensic review of the intrusion into the hospital's financial network. He had determined that the $200,000 transfer had not originated from any internal user. It had originated from an external actor, a remote attacker who had exploited a vulnerability in the hospital's outdated software and routed the transaction through a compromised employee account to disguise the source. The compromised account, the account they were blaming on Angela Hayes. Raymond Okafor had written in plain language in an email dated 11 months ago that Angela Hayes's login credentials had been stolen and used by someone she had never met in a place she had never been to commit a crime she knew nothing about. He had written the truth. He had sent it to the FBI. He had sent it to the U.S. Attorney's Office, and he had sent it personally directly to Victoria Hale. 11 months ago, before she filed a single charge, Jordan sat in the basement of the library, and he understood all at once the full and terrible shape of what he was looking at, and it was so much worse than he had imagined. Victoria Hale had known. She had known from the very beginning, before she ever stood up in that courtroom and called Angela a criminal, before she froze her bank account, before she put a lien on her home, before she laughed at Jordan in front of the jury and called him a Reddit-educated kid playing lawyer. Before all of it, she had held in her hands an email from a city technician that proved his mother was innocent, and she had buried it. She had taken the one piece of paper that could set an innocent woman free, and she had dropped it into a truckload of hay, and she had gone forward with the prosecution anyway, because a conviction was a conviction, and 98% was 98%. And a laundry worker from the South Side was exactly the kind of person you could put away without anyone asking too many questions. Jordan didn't have the words for the crime yet. He would find them over the next few hours, reading in the gray morning light with his heart pounding in his ears. There was a name for what she had done. It was called a Brady violation. In 1963, the Supreme Court had ruled in a case called Brady versus Maryland that a prosecutor is required by the Constitution to turn over any evidence that might help prove the defendant innocent. It is not optional. It is not a courtesy. It is the law, one of the oldest and most sacred rules in the entire American justice system, and it exists for one simple reason. Because the government's job is not to win. The government's job is to find the truth. Victoria Hale had spent 14 years and 98% of her career forgetting that. And now Jordan Hayes had proof. He looked down at the email on the screen. Exhibit 99, he would number it later the 99th item in his evidence file, and he would remember that number for the rest of his life. For a long moment, he just breathed. The rage came first, and it was enormous, a hot black wave that rose up in his chest and made his hands into fists. He thought about his mother in that gray jumpsuit. He thought about her crying through the slot in the visiting room, telling him to finish school, not knowing that the woman prosecuting her had known she was innocent the whole time. He thought about the laughter in the courtroom. Oh, honey, this isn't a movie. He wanted to run straight to the courthouse. He wanted to stand up and scream it, hold the paper over his head, and scream that she knew. And then slowly, the cold, clear part of his mind took over again, the part that saw patterns, and it told him something that stopped him where he sat. If he did that, he would lose. He could see it play out. He could see exactly how it would go because he had spent 3 days watching Victoria Hale, and he understood her now. If he stood up and waved the email in the air, she would object. She would say it was authenticated improperly. She would say the chain of custody was broken. She would say the defendant's son had no way to prove the email was real, that he'd fabricated it, that a teenager with a computer science background could have typed it up himself in a library basement. She would turn his greatest weapon into a weapon against him. She was a shark. Blood in the water only made her faster. And the judge who liked her, who trusted her, who saw Jordan as a well-meaning boy in over his head, would probably sustain every one of her objections, the way he had sustained all the others. No, Jordan could not simply reveal the email. He had to do something harder than that. He had to make her lie about it first. He had to build a trap. He sat there in the basement as the sun rose over Chicago, and the plan began to assemble itself in his mind piece by piece, the way the truth always did, the shape emerging from the noise. He would need to call her as a witness. He wasn't even sure he was allowed to do that, so he read for another hour until he found the provision that said in rare cases when opposing counsel was themselves central to allegations of misconduct, they could be called to the stand. It was rare. It was almost never done. But it was there in the rules in black and white, and Victoria Hale herself had taught him something these last 3 days. The rules were a weapon, and they cut both ways. He would put her on the stand. He would not show her the email. He would ask her calmly, respectfully under oath whether she had ever received any communication suggesting that the fraud might have come from an external source. He would ask her whether she had ever seen any evidence of Angela Hayes' innocence. He would ask her, and she would say no, because she would have to say no because admitting yes would end her career and possibly her freedom. She would look at this boy she'd been mocking for 3 days, this Reddit-educated kid, and she would decide he had nothing, and she would lie. And the moment the lie left her mouth, Jordan Hayes would reach into his folder and take out Exhibit 99. Jordan closed the laptop. His hands had stopped shaking. He was calm now, calmer than he had been in 8 months, with the strange, floating calm of a person who has finally set down a weight he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten it was there. He gathered his papers. He organized them the way he organized everything precisely in order each page where it needed to be. He put the email at the very back of the folder, the last card, the one you don't show until the very end. Then he walked out of the library and into the cold Chicago morning, and he took the train downtown, and he went to see his mother. The visiting room at the detention center smelled like bleach and old coffee. Angela Hayes came out in her gray jumpsuit, and when she saw Jordan, she smiled the way she always smiled at him, that tired, warm smile that made him feel even now, even here, like everything might somehow be all right. "You look terrible, baby," she said, sitting down across from him, picking up the phone on her side of the glass. "You been sleeping?" "I'm fine, Mama." "You are not fine. You got those circles under your eyes. Are you eating, Jordan Michael? Are you eating?" And Jordan, who had been so calm, so cold and clear, felt his throat close up. Because she was in here accused of a crime she never committed, staring down 20 years in a federal prison, and she was worried about whether he was eating. "I'm eating," he lied. She studied him through the glass. She had always been able to read him since he was a little boy, since before he could talk. She read him now. "Something happened," she said quietly. "Something changed. I can see it on your face." Jordan looked at his mother. He thought about telling her everything, about the email, about Victoria Hale, about what he'd found in the basement of the library at 3 a.m, about the plan, but he didn't. Because if he told her, Hope would get into her, and Hope was dangerous. Hope could show on her face in the courtroom. Hope could tip Victoria Hale off that something was coming. And the whole plan, the entire fragile, beautiful plan, depended on Victoria Hale believing right up until the final second that Jordan Hayes had nothing. So he did the hardest thing he had ever done. He looked his mother in the eye and he kept his secret, and he said only this: "Mama, I need you to trust me. Whatever happens in that courtroom on Friday, whatever it looks like, however bad it gets, I need you to trust me, and I need you to hold on. Can you do that?" Angela Hayes looked at her son through the glass for a long moment, and whatever she saw in his face, it was enough because slowly she nodded. "I trust you," she said. "I always trusted you. Even when the whole world said you were strange, I knew. I knew God made you the way He made you for a reason." She pressed her free hand flat against the glass. "You find the reason yet, baby?" Jordan pressed his hand against the glass, matching hers palm-to-palm cold glass between them. "I think I'm about to," he said. That same evening across the city, Victoria Hale sat alone in her office on the 14th floor of the federal building, and she was in a very good mood. The Hayes case was going exactly as planned, better than planned. The boy was making it easy. Every time he stood up and stammered and got shut down, the jury liked her a little more and trusted him a little less. And by Friday, when she rested her case, there would be nothing left of the defense but a grieving teenager and a guilty verdict. 98% was about to become 98 point something. Another brick in the wall, another shark's tooth. She was reviewing her closing argument when her assistant knocked and told her a man was here to see her. Wouldn't give a name, said it was about the Hayes case. Victoria frowned, but she told the assistant to send him in. The man who walked into her office was in his 30s, tired-looking, wearing a city employee's lanyard. He introduced himself as Raymond Okafor, and the moment he said the name, something cold moved through Victoria Hale's chest, though her face never changed. "I don't think we've met," she said pleasantly. "We haven't," Raymond said, "but I emailed you 11 months ago about the Hayes case, about the intrusion. I sent you my forensic report." "Did you?" Victoria said. "I did," Raymond said. He was nervous. His hands were moving. "And I've been following the trial in the news, Ms. Hale, and I have to tell you, I'm confused because everything I'm reading says you're prosecuting Angela Hayes for the fraud, and my report said I proved that it wasn't her. It was an external attacker. Her credentials were stolen. I sent you that. I don't understand why." "Mr. Okafor," Victoria Hale said, and her voice was smooth as ice on a lake, "I received thousands of emails. I don't recall yours, and I would strongly advise you not to insert yourself into an active federal prosecution based on a technical opinion that has not been properly vetted, authenticated, or entered into evidence by any qualified party. Do you understand me?" Raymond stared at her. "Are you," he said slowly, "telling me to keep quiet?" "I'm telling you," Victoria said, standing, walking around her desk, opening her office door for him with a smile, "that you should go home, Mr. Okafor, and let the professionals handle the law. Have a good evening." And she showed him out. But after the door closed, Victoria Hale did not go back to her closing argument. She stood in the middle of her office for a long time, very still, and for the first time in a long time, the 98% did not feel like a wall she was building. It felt like a wall she was standing behind. And behind it, faint but growing, she could hear something she had not heard in 14 years. She could hear it coming. She just didn't know yet that it was coming in the shape of a 19-year-old boy in the basement of a library who had already found the email and who had already numbered it and who was already at that very moment sitting at his kitchen table across the city, laying out his mother's whole life in careful order, saving the truth for last. Jordan worked through the night. He didn't sleep. He arranged and rearranged his questions, testing each one, imagining every way Victoria Hale might slip the trap, closing every exit. He practiced the words out loud in the empty apartment in his mother's kitchen, under the little wooden cross by the sink. He made his voice steady. He made it calm. He made himself into the kind of person who could stand in a federal courtroom in front of the woman who had tried to destroy his family and not flinch. And near dawn, when the sky over Chicago had just begun to turn from black to gray, Jordan Hayes stopped working. He set down his pen. He looked at the folder in front of him, thick and neat and precise, 99 exhibits, and at the very back, the last one, the email that was going to change everything. He thought about the laughter in the courtroom. He thought about, "Oh, honey, this isn't a movie." He thought about his mother's hand pressed against the glass. "Friday," he said quietly to the empty kitchen, to the wooden cross, to the woman who wasn't there to hear it. "On Friday, Mama, they're going to stop laughing." And outside over the sleeping city, the sun came up on the last 3 days of Victoria Hale's 98%, and on the last 3 days of Angela Hayes' imprisonment, and on the morning that a boy the whole world had called strange finally understood exactly what he was for. Thursday morning came, and Victoria Hale rested her case 1 day early. She did it on purpose. She stood up in that courtroom, straightened her jacket, and told Judge Ellison that the prosecution was confident enough in its evidence that it saw no need to drag things out. It was a message, and everyone in the room understood it. She was telling the jury that the case was so strong she didn't even need her full allotment of time. She was telling Jordan that he'd better get ready because his turn was coming a full day sooner than he'd expected, and he wasn't ready, and she knew he wasn't ready. Except Jordan was ready. He'd been ready since 3 o'clock that morning in the basement of the library. He just couldn't let her see it. "The defense will present its case tomorrow," the judge said, looking at Jordan with that same tired kindness. "Mr. Hayes, are you prepared to proceed on Friday?" Jordan stood. He made his voice small and uncertain, and he hated how easy it was to do, because a part of him really was that small and uncertain, and he just pushed that part to the front where Hale could see it. "I'll be ready, Your Honor," he said, and he let his voice waver on the last word. Victoria Hale almost smiled. He caught it, the little twitch at the corner of her mouth, the shark tasting the water. She thought he was scared. Good. Let her think it. The judge adjourned until Friday morning, and that afternoon Jordan did something he hadn't told anyone he was going to do. He took the train south past his own neighborhood, all the way out to a small brick building in a part of the city he'd never had a reason to visit, and he knocked on the door of an apartment, and he waited. Raymond Okafor opened the door with the chain still on. "Mr. Okafor," Jordan said through the gap, "my name is Jordan Hayes. Angela Hayes is my mother. You wrote an email 11 months ago that proves she's innocent. I need to talk to you." For a long moment, Raymond Okafor didn't say anything. He just looked at the boy standing in his hallway, this tired kid with the circles under his eyes, and the folder clutched against his chest like it was the only thing holding him together. Then he closed the door. Jordan's heart dropped, and then he heard the chain slide back, and the door opened again all the way. "I went to see her," Raymond said quietly. "The prosecutor yesterday. I told her about the report." Jordan went very still. "What did she say?" "She told me she didn't remember my email." Raymond's jaw tightened. "Thousands of emails," she said. "And then she told me to go home and let the professionals handle it. She told me to keep quiet, son. She stood in her office with that smile on her face, and she told me to keep quiet about a woman going to prison for something I proved she didn't do." Jordan felt the cold, clear thing move through him again, that focus, that certainty. Because this changed things. This didn't weaken his trap. It strengthened it. Victoria Hale had just told a witness she didn't remember his email. She'd said it out loud to his face less than 24 hours before Jordan was going to put her under oath. "Mr. Okafor," Jordan said carefully, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to think about it before you answer, because it's going to cost you something no matter what you say." Raymond waited. "Tomorrow," Jordan said, "I'm going to put the prosecutor on the witness stand. I'm going to ask her under oath whether she ever received any evidence that my mother was innocent. And she's going to lie. She's going to say no." He took a breath. And when she does, I'm going to need someone who can stand up and say that isn't true. Someone who can say, I sent her that report myself. I told her to her face, and she looked me in the eye and told me to keep quiet. Raymond Okafor was quiet for a long time. You know what happens to a city IT tech who testifies against a federal prosecutor, he said finally. You know what that does to my career, my family. I know, Jordan said. I know exactly what it costs because it's the same thing it cost me. I dropped out of school. I lost everything I was building, and I'd do it again 100 times because she's my mother, and she's innocent, and somebody has to tell the truth. He looked Raymond in the eye. You already told the truth once. 11 months ago, in an email. Nobody read it, nobody cared. His voice dropped. Come tell it again, out loud, where they can't bury it. 9 o'clock the next morning, Friday, the day everything would end one way or another. The courtroom was even more crowded than before. Word had gotten out the way it does that the laundry worker's teenage son was putting on his defense today, and half the gallery had come to watch the show. Reporters filled the back rows. Somewhere among them, a producer from a local news station was hoping for exactly the kind of humiliation Victoria Hale had been dishing out all week. Angela Hayes was brought in wearing the same gray jumpsuit. She found Jordan's face immediately the way she always did, and Jordan gave her the smallest nod. Trust me. Hold on. She nodded back. Judge Ellison took the bench. Mr. Hayes, the defense may call its first witness. And Jordan Hayes stood up. He didn't shake this time. That was the first thing Victoria Hale noticed, though it didn't register as a warning yet. The boy who had stammered and wavered all week stood up straight, and his hands were steady, and when he spoke his voice was clear and calm, and it filled the whole room. Your Honor, Jordan said, the defense calls Victoria Hale to the stand. For one full second, nobody moved. Then the courtroom detonated. The gallery burst into noise, gasps, and murmurs, and one loud, disbelieving laugh. Victoria Hale herself froze halfway out of her chair, and Judge Ellison brought his gavel down hard. Order! Order! He turned to Jordan, and the kindness was gone from his face, now replaced by something sharper. Mr. Hayes, I don't know what you think you're doing, but you cannot call the prosecuting attorney as a witness. That is not how this works. Objection sustained before it's even raised. Call another witness. Your Honor, Jordan said, and his voice did not waver. With respect, the rule permits it. The rule permits no such thing. It does, Your Honor. Jordan opened his folder, took out a single sheet of paper, and held it up. Federal precedent allows opposing counsel to be called as a witness when that counsel is central to allegations of misconduct in the case being tried. I'm not asking to call her as a strategy. I'm calling her because she is a witness to the central question of this trial, and I'm prepared to make an offer of proof to the court if you'll permit me to approach. Victoria Hale was on her feet now fully. Your Honor, this is a stunt. This is a desperate theatrical stunt by a boy who has no defense and knows it. He's trying to turn this courtroom into a circus because he can't win it as a trial. I move to strike the entire request, and I ask the court to instruct the jury to disregard it. Ms. Hale, the judge started. Allegations of misconduct, she went on, her voice rising sharp now and something underneath it that hadn't been there all week. What allegations? There are no allegations of misconduct. He's making it up. He's making it up right now in front of everyone because that's all he's got. And Jordan Hayes looked at her and he said quietly into the sudden hush, Then you have nothing to be afraid of. The room went silent. It hung there. Everyone heard it. And Victoria Hale, who had spent 14 years reading people who could smell fear the way a shark smells blood, felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt the floor tilt just slightly, just a fraction of a degree, because the boy wasn't scared. The boy was calm. And calm was wrong. Calm meant he had something, and she had spent all week making absolutely certain that he had nothing. She recovered fast. She'd built a career on recovering fast. Your Honor, she said, and her voice was ice again, smooth and controlled. If defense counsel wants to make a spectacle of himself, I have nothing to hide. Let him ask his questions. I'll answer them. And then I'd ask the court to consider sanctions for wasting everyone's time. It was a mistake. It was the first real mistake Victoria Hale had made in 11 months, and she made it because her pride would not let her look like she was hiding from a teenager. She had just consented in open court to take the stand. The judge looked at Jordan for a long moment. Then he looked at Hale, and then slowly he said, "The witness has consented. I'll allow it narrowly, and Mr. Hayes, your leash is very short. One hint of a fishing expedition, and I shut this down. Ms. Hale, please take the stand." Victoria Hale walked to the witness box. She was still smiling. She raised her right hand. The clerk swore her in, and she said the words, "I do. I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth." And she sat down, and she crossed her legs, and she looked at Jordan Hayes with the patient contempt of a woman waiting for a child to finish embarrassing himself. Jordan walked to the center of the room. He didn't bring his folder with him. He left it closed on the defense table in plain sight, and Victoria Hale glanced at it, and she thought empty. She thought he's got nothing in there. She was wrong. "Ms. Hale," Jordan began, and his voice was courteous, almost gentle. "You've been a federal prosecutor for 14 years, is that correct?" 14 years, yes. "And in that time you've built quite a reputation, a 98% conviction rate. Is that accurate?" "Objection," she said automatically, then caught herself because she was the witness now, and a small laugh went through the gallery. She smiled tightly. "I'm proud of my record, yes." "You should be," Jordan said. 98%. That's a lot of convictions. That's a lot of people you've been very, very sure were guilty." "I don't take cases I'm not sure of." "You were sure of this one." "I'm certain of this one." "Certain," Jordan repeated. He let the words sit. "When did you first receive the case file on my mother, Ms. Hale?" 11 months ago, roughly." 11 months ago. And when you received it, you reviewed the evidence thoroughly. You reviewed everything. Everything relevant. Jordan tilted his head slightly. Everything relevant. That's an interesting way to say it. Who decides what's relevant, Ms. Hale? "Objection," she said, then stopped again, and this time the frustration flashed across her face before she could hide it. "I review the case materials as they come to me. That's my job." "So you review everything that comes to you?" "Yes." "You don't skip things?" "No." "You don't ignore things?" "No." "You wouldn't, for example, receive a piece of evidence and simply set it aside because it was inconvenient." The tempo of the room had changed. The reporters in the back had stopped whispering. Everyone could feel it now, the way the questions were tightening one loop at a time, and even the people who didn't understand the law understood that something was happening, that the boy was walking the prosecutor somewhere, step by careful step. "Your Honor," Victoria Hale said, turning to the judge, "where is this going? He's asking me abstract questions about my work habits. It's irrelevant." "Mr. Hayes," the judge said, "get to your point." "I'm almost there, Your Honor." Jordan turned back to her. "Ms. Hale, during your investigation of this case, did you ever receive any evidence from any source suggesting that the fraud might have been committed by someone other than my mother?" There it was, the door of the trap standing open. Victoria Hale did not hesitate. That was the thing Jordan had counted on. She'd spent 14 years never hesitating, and hesitation now would look like guilt. And so she answered the way she always answered, fast and certain and cold. "No," she said. "I did not." The word landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Jordan kept his face perfectly neutral. Inside, everything went quiet and cold and clear. "You're certain of that," he said. "I'm certain of everything, Mr. Hayes. I already told you that." "So to be absolutely clear," Jordan said, and he took one step closer to the witness box, "you are testifying under oath that in the 11 months you handled this case, you never received any communication from anyone suggesting that this fraud was committed by an external attacker rather than by Angela Hayes." And here for the first time, Victoria Hale hesitated. It was tiny. It was a quarter of a second. But Jordan saw it, and the judge saw it, and somewhere in the back of the room a reporter leaned forward. Because in that quarter of a second, Victoria Hale's mind had flashed to a tired man standing in her office 2 days ago, saying, "I sent you my forensic report," and she had thought, "Does the boy know? Could the boy possibly know?" And then she had looked at that closed folder on the defense table, empty, she'd decided, harmless, and she had made the second great mistake of her 11 months on this case. She doubled down. "Never!" she said. "No such communication, no such evidence, nothing. Nothing at all. Nothing at all, Mr. Hayes. Are you finished?" Jordan Hayes looked at her for a long moment, and then very softly he said, "Almost." He walked back to the defense table. He opened the folder, and the whole courtroom watched him do it. And Victoria Hale watched him do it, and for the first time all week, the smile was completely gone from her face. He took out a single sheet of paper. "Your Honor," Jordan said, "I'd like to enter into Evidence Defense Exhibit 99. "Objection!" Victoria Hale said instantly, standing up in the witness box. "Whatever that is, it hasn't been authenticated. There's no foundation, no chain of custody." "Ms. Hale," the judge said, and something in his voice made her stop. He was looking at the paper in Jordan's hand. "You're a witness right now. You'll sit down and you'll let me hear what it is before you object to it. Mr. Hayes, what is Exhibit 99? Jordan held it up so the light caught it. "It's an email, Your Honor," he said. "Dated 11 months ago, sent from Raymond Okafor, an IT technician with the City of Chicago's Data Services Division, to the FBI field office and to the Office of the United States Attorney. In it, Mr. Okafor states, after a full forensic review, that the $200,000 transfer did not originate from any internal user, that it came from an external attacker who stole my mother's login credentials to disguise the source, that my mother is innocent." The gallery erupted. The judge hammered the gavel. Angela Hayes brought both hands to her mouth. And Victoria Hale sat frozen in the witness box, and the color was draining out of her face because she knew she already knew what was coming next. "And Your Honor," Jordan said, when the room had quieted enough for him to be heard, "this email was carbon copied to one specific individual, by name, by personal address." He turned, and he looked directly at Victoria Hale, and his voice did not rise, and it did not shake, and it filled every corner of that silent room. "It was copied to Victoria Hale 11 months ago, before she filed a single charge against my mother." The silence that followed was the loudest thing Jordan had ever heard. Victoria Hale opened her mouth. Nothing came out. For the first time in 14 years, the woman with the 98% conviction rate had nothing to say. "Your Honor," Jordan continued, and now, only now, did a little heat come into his voice. 60 seconds ago, this witness testified under oath that she never received any communication suggesting my mother's innocence. I have in my hand a communication addressed to her personally saying exactly that, sent nearly a year ago. One of those two things is a lie, and it's not the email. "Objection," Victoria Hale finally managed, and her voice cracked in the middle of the word, and everyone heard it crack. "That email could be fabricated. He has a computer science background. Your Honor, he could have typed that up himself. There's no way to verify." "Then verify it," Jordan said. And he turned to the doors at the back of the courtroom. "Your Honor, the defense calls Raymond Okafor." The doors opened, and Raymond Okafor, in his city employee's lanyard, tired and scared and doing it anyway, walked down the center aisle of the courtroom toward the witness stand. Victoria Hale watched him come, and something happened to her face that no one in that courtroom had ever seen happen to Victoria Hale. It fell apart. Just for an instant before she caught it, the whole careful mask cracked, and underneath it was pure naked panic. "Your Honor," she said, standing, and her voice had lost all its ice. "I need a recess. I need to consult." "Sit down, Ms. Hale," the judge said. He was not looking at her with kindness anymore. He was not looking at her with anything at all except a cold, hard attention. "You wanted to take the stand. You're on the stand. You'll sit there until I say otherwise. Mr. Okafor, please come forward and be sworn." Raymond Okafor took the oath. His hands were shaking, but his voice, when it came, was steady enough. "Mr. Okafor," Jordan said gently, "do you recognize the email in Exhibit 99? "I wrote it," Raymond said. "You sent it 11 months ago." "I did. To whom?" "To the FBI. And to the U.S. Attorney's Office." He paused, and then he looked directly at Victoria Hale in the witness box beside him. "And I copied it to her, to Ms. Hale, directly, because she was the lead on the case and I wanted to be sure it got to her." "And what did the email say?" "It said what I found, that the transfer came from outside, that Ms. Hayes' account was hijacked, that she didn't do it. Raymond's voice tightened. I proved it. I put it in writing. I sent it to the people who were supposed to want the truth. Jordan let that sit for a moment. Then very quietly he asked the question that ended everything. Mr. Okafor, have you spoken to Ms. Hale about this email recently, in person? Raymond looked at Victoria Hale. 2 days ago, he said. I went to her office. I told her I'd been following the trial and I didn't understand why she was prosecuting an innocent woman when I'd sent her proof 11 months ago. His voice grew steadier as he went, the fear burning off something like anger taking its place. She told me she didn't remember my email. Thousands of emails, she said. And then she told me to go home and let the professionals handle it. She told me to keep quiet. The courtroom made a sound, then a low collective sound, something between a gasp and a growl, the sound of 100 people realizing at once exactly what kind of thing they had been watching all week, and exactly who the villain had been the whole time, and it had never ever been the boy. Victoria Hale sat in the witness box with two truths crushing her at once. The first was the email which proved she'd known Angela was innocent. The second was Raymond Okafor's testimony, which proved she'd known she knew that she'd been reminded of it 48 hours ago and had lied under oath anyway in this room this morning. The first was a Brady violation, the burying of exculpatory evidence, a career-ending offense. The second was perjury, a crime committed live in front of a federal judge and 12 jurors and a room full of reporters. Jordan had not simply proven she was wrong. He had made her destroy herself with her own mouth 60 seconds before he showed his hand. Your Honor, Jordan said, turning back to the bench, and his voice was calm again, almost tender. I'd like the record to reflect the sequence of events. At 9:41 this morning, Ms. Hale testified under oath that she never received any evidence of my mother's innocence. At 9:43, I introduced an email sent to her personally 11 months ago containing exactly that evidence, and a witness has now testified that he reminded her of that email in person 2 days ago. He paused. This isn't a mistake, Your Honor. A mistake you forget. You don't forget when someone stands in your office and reminds you. This is a choice. She chose to hide it. She chose to prosecute an innocent woman, and she chose in this courtroom this morning to lie about it under oath. Victoria Hale finally found her voice, and it was a terrible thin-cornered thing. You have no idea, she said, how many cases I handle. You have no idea what my caseload looks like. Things get missed. Things fall through. Mr. Okafor didn't fall through, Jordan said. You looked him in the eye 2 days ago and told him to keep quiet. That's his word against mine. Is it? Jordan turned to the judge. Your Honor, Mr. Okafor is a city employee. His visit to a federal building 2 days ago would have been logged at security. Badge scan, sign-in sheet, timestamp. He looked back at Victoria Hale, and for just a moment, just one something fierce and cold flickered in his eyes, the boy who had learned patterns in a library basement at 3 a.m. You taught me something this week, Ms. Hale. You taught me that in the law, everything leaves a record. Every login, every timestamp, every email, every badge scan. He let it land. You should have remembered that before you told me my mother's server logs didn't matter, because it turns out the record is the only thing in this whole building that can't be intimidated. It just sits there, and it tells the truth. Judge Ellison set down his gavel. He didn't slam it. He set it down carefully, and the small, deliberate motion was somehow more frightening than any pounding could have been. We're going to take a recess, he said in a voice like the bottom of a lake. Ms. Hale, you'll remain in this building. Mr. Okafor, thank you. You're excused, but do not leave the city. Marshals, I want the security logs for this building for the past 72 hours brought to my chambers. He looked at Victoria Hale one last time, and whatever had been left of the professional courtesy between them, the shared world of prosecutors and judges, was gone from his eyes completely. And someone get the Office of Professional Responsibility on the phone, now. He rose. The whole courtroom rose with him. And as he swept toward his chambers, Victoria Hale sat alone in the witness box, in front of the packed gallery, in front of the reporters, in front of the woman whose life she had tried to steal. And she understood finally completely that the 98% was over. That it had ended the moment she'd said the word no. That a 19-year-old boy the whole world had called strange had walked her one gentle question at a time, straight off the edge of a cliff she'd built herself, and she hadn't seen it until she was already falling. And across the courtroom, Angela Hayes sat with tears running down her face, both hands pressed flat against the wooden rail in front of her, staring at her son like she was seeing him for the very first time. Not the strange child, not the boy the world didn't understand, but the reason. The reason God had made him exactly the way He'd made him. She had told him she trusted him, and she had told him to hold on, and he had told her to trust him back. And now, in a federal courtroom in Chicago, in front of the whole world, he had done the impossible thing he'd promised. He had made them stop laughing. Jordan turned away from the collapsing prosecutor and the stunned gallery, and the reporters already scrambling for the doors. And he looked at his mother, and their eyes met across the room. He didn't smile, not yet. It wasn't over yet. Not completely. There were still rulings to come, and orders to sign, and a system that had to be forced one final time to admit what it had done. But he gave her the smallest nod. The same nod as always. Trust me, hold on. And Angela Hayes, through her tears, nodded back. The recess lasted 40 minutes, and every one of them felt like an hour to Jordan Hayes. He sat at the defense table with his folder closed in front of him, and he did not let himself feel anything yet, because he had learned this week that the moment you let yourself feel the win slips away. Victoria Hale had taught him that too, without meaning to. So he sat still and he breathed, and he watched the marshals come and go through the door to the judge's chambers, and he waited. Across the aisle of the prosecution table, Victoria Hale sat alone. Her second chair, a younger attorney named Pearson, who'd spent the whole trial handing her documents, had quietly gotten up and moved his chair 6 inches away from her at the start of the recess. 6 inches. It didn't sound like much, but everyone in that courtroom saw it and everyone understood it, and Victoria Hale understood it best of all. It was the first rat leaving the ship. It would not be the last. She sat very straight. She kept her chin up. She was still in her own mind. Victoria Hale, and she was already building the wall in her head, already assembling the arguments. A clerical oversight, an overwhelming caseload, a hostile witness with a personal grievance. She would say she misspoke on the stand. She would say she'd confused this case with another. She had talked her way out of tight corners before, and she told herself she would talk her way out of this one. But then the door to chambers opened, and Judge Robert Ellison came back to the bench, and he was carrying a stack of papers, and Victoria Hale looked at the top sheet of that stack, and the wall she'd been building in her head cracked straight down the middle. Because the top sheet was the security log. "Be seated," the judge said, and the courtroom sat. He set the papers down in front of him and squared them slowly, and then he looked out over the room and he began to speak in a voice that was quiet and even and absolutely without mercy. Before the recess, he said, "The witness, Mr. Okafor, testified that he visited the office of the prosecuting attorney 2 days ago and personally informed her of the existence of exculpatory evidence in this case. I asked the marshals to retrieve this building's security records for the past 72 hours. He picked up the top sheet. The visitor log shows that at 2:47 in the afternoon the day before yesterday, a city employee badged into the 14th floor. The name on the log is Raymond Okafor. The destination on the log is the office of Assistant United States Attorney Victoria Hale." The courtroom was so quiet, Jordan could hear the clock on the back wall. "Ms. Hale," the judge said, and he set the sheet down and looked at her. "Would you like to revise your testimony from this morning?" And here Jordan watched the exact moment it happened. He watched the exact moment Victoria Hale's mind ran out of exits. Because she couldn't say she misspoke. The email was addressed to her by name. She couldn't say she confused the cases. Raymond Okafor's report was specific to this one. She couldn't say she'd forgotten. The badge scan proved she'd been reminded to her face 48 hours ago. Every door she reached for Jordan had already walked over to earlier that morning and quietly locked one at a time without her even noticing he was doing it. That was the thing about the trap. It hadn't sprung all at once. It had closed slowly over the course of an hour, and by the time she felt it around her, there was nothing left to do but stand inside it. "Your Honor," she said, and her voice was not smooth anymore. It was careful. It was the voice of someone walking across ice they know is about to break. "I'd like to consult with counsel before answering any further questions." "You'd like counsel," the judge repeated. "I believe that's my right." "It is your right," Judge Ellison said. "It's a right I've watched you spend the last 4 days making very difficult for a 19-year-old boy to exercise on behalf of his mother." He let that sit. He let the whole room hear it. "But yes, Ms. Hale, you have the right to counsel, and based on what I'm looking at, I'd strongly advise you to use it." A murmur ran through the gallery, because everyone understood what the judge had just done. He hadn't said she needed a lawyer to keep prosecuting. He'd said she needed a lawyer to defend herself. In the space of one morning, Victoria Hale had gone from the prosecutor in this case to the target of the next one. "Your Honor," Jordan said, rising, and his voice was respectful and quiet. "The defense has additional matters it would like the court to consider. May I be heard?" "You may, Mr. Hayes." And this time, when the judge said his name, there was something in it that had never been there before. Respect, not the tired affection of a man humoring a boy. Respect the real thing from one person who understood the law to another. "Go ahead." Jordan stepped out from behind the table. He didn't need notes. He'd lived inside this for 8 months. "Your Honor, the perjury and the buried evidence are the heart of this, but they're not the whole of it. There's the matter of my mother's property." He took a breath. "The morning after my mother was arrested, before this trial began, before any verdict, the government froze her bank account and placed a lien on our home, civil forfeiture. The account had $1,100 in it. It was the money she'd been saving to fix the heater." His voice stayed steady, but something moved underneath it. "They took it. And they took the apartment she'd lived in for 19 years, before a jury heard a single word." "That's standard procedure in a fraud case, Your Honor," Victoria Hale said, and it was almost a reflex, the old certainty flickering back for a moment. "Asset seizure is—" "It requires a review," Jordan said, not looking at her, keeping his eyes on the judge. "Federal law requires a proportionality review before assets are seized in a case like this. A hearing. A judge is supposed to look at the seizure and ask whether it's excessive, whether it's constitutional under the 8th Amendment. He paused. "That review never happened, Your Honor. I've been through every page of the discovery. There is no record of it. Because there was no hearing. They skipped it." The judge's eyes sharpened. "You're citing the excessive fines clause." "Timms versus Indiana, Your Honor. 2019. Unanimous. The Supreme Court held that the 8th Amendment's protection against excessive fines applies to the states, and that civil forfeiture cannot be used as a tool to strip a person of everything they own without constitutional limits." He let it land. "My mother is a hospital laundry worker. They took her home and her savings over an accusation that the prosecutor already knew was false. If that's not an excessive fine, Your Honor, I don't know what is." Victoria Hale opened her mouth and then she closed it again because there was nothing to say. She had built the seizure on the assumption that Angela Hayes was guilty. Now the whole foundation was gone, and the seizure was standing on nothing, and everyone in the room could see it standing on nothing. Judge Ellison leaned back. He looked at Jordan for a long moment, and then he did something that made the entire courtroom sit up. He took off his glasses, and he rubbed his eyes, the same tired gesture Jordan had watched him make all week. But this time it was different, because this time the tiredness wasn't aimed at Jordan. "Mr. Hayes," he said slowly, "I owe you an apology." You could have heard a pin drop. "On Tuesday," the judge went on, "I told you that loyalty is not a law degree. I told you that you didn't belong in this courtroom. I sustained objection after objection against you, and I told myself I was being fair, that I was just applying the rules." He paused and his jaw tightened. "But the truth is, I looked at you and I saw a kid in over his head, and I stopped looking closer. I decided what you were before you'd shown me. That's exactly the thing this system is supposed to protect people from, and I did it to you in my own courtroom for 4 days." He set his glasses down. "You had the truth the whole time, and I nearly let it get buried because I was too busy deciding you were nobody to hear it. So, I'm sorry." Jordan Hayes stood in the middle of the courtroom, and for the first time all week, he didn't have a prepared answer. Something moved in his chest, hot and sudden, and he had to swallow before he could speak. "Thank you, Your Honor," he said quietly, "but it's not me who needed to hear it." He turned just slightly toward the woman in the gray jumpsuit. "It's her!" And the judge looked at Angela Hayes, and his face changed again. "Ms. Hayes," he said, "would you stand, please?" Angela Hayes rose. She was trembling. Her hands gripped the rail. She had spent 8 months being talked about, described, characterized, accused. But nobody in this whole process had really looked at her, not once, not as a person. The prosecution had made her into a story. And now, for the first time, the judge was looking at her, the actual woman, and she didn't know what to do with it. "Ms. Hayes," Judge Ellison said, "I've spent 4 days listening to people talk about you. I'd like to hear from you for a moment, if you're willing. Not testimony, just I'd like to know one thing." He paused. "When they froze your account and took your home before this trial even started, what did that do to you?" Angela Hayes stood in the silence, and her mouth worked, and for a moment, Jordan was afraid she wouldn't be able to speak at all. And then she did, and her voice was rough and small, and it broke halfway through, and it was the truest thing anyone had said in that courtroom all week. "I couldn't understand it," she said. "That's the thing, Your Honor. I kept thinking there's been a mistake, and if I just explain, they'll see. I fold sheets, I push a cart. I've done it 11 years. I don't even know how to send the kind of money they said I sent. I don't have a computer. My son had to show me how to use the video machine to see him." Tears were running down her face, but she didn't wipe them. "And then they took my apartment. 19 years I lived there. That's where I raised my boy. And nobody asked me. Nobody let me say anything. They just took it. And I sat in that cell and I thought, if they can do this, if they can just decide you did something and take everything before anybody even looks, then what's to stop them doing it to anybody? To anybody's mother." She looked at her son then, just for a second. "And the only reason anybody's listening now," she said, "is because my boy wouldn't stop. Everybody told him to stop. The lawyer told him to take the deal. The judge told him he didn't belong here. That woman laughed at him." Her voice steadied, and something fierce came into it, the fierceness of a mother. "And he didn't stop. So don't you tell me he doesn't belong in a courtroom. He belongs here more than anybody in this room, because he's the only one who came here for the truth." The gallery was silent. Somewhere in the back, a reporter had stopped writing and was just listening. And Victoria Hale at the prosecution table sat with her eyes down and her hands folded, and for the first time she could not build a wall against it because there was nothing to argue with. There was just a mother telling the truth about what had been done to her. Judge Ellison was quiet for a long moment. "Thank you, Ms. Hayes," he said. "You can sit down." She sat. Jordan wanted to go to her to put his arms around her, but he couldn't, not yet. There was still a rail and a system between them, so he just looked at her, and she looked at him, and it was enough. The judge turned back to the room, and his voice changed again, becoming formal, becoming the voice of the bench. "Here is where we are," he said. "This case cannot proceed to the jury in its current form. Exculpatory evidence was withheld from the defense in violation of Brady v. Maryland. Sworn testimony given in this courtroom this morning appears to be directly contradicted by documentary evidence and this building's own security records. And the pretrial seizure of the defendant's assets appears to have been conducted without the constitutionally required review." He paused. "I'm not going to rule on all of it from the bench this instant. Some of this requires briefing, and some of it is going to require people other than me. But I can tell you the direction this is going, and I see no reason to make Ms. Hayes sit in a cell one more night while I write it all down." Jordan's heart began to pound. "Ms. Hale," the judge said, "does the government intend to proceed with this prosecution?" And there it was. The question that ended her career asked plainly in front of everyone, because there was only one answer she could give. If she said yes, if she stood up and said the government intended to keep prosecuting Angela Hayes after everything that had just come out, she would be confessing in open court that she was willing to keep pursuing a woman she knew to be innocent. And if she said no, she was surrendering publicly, completely, the first surrender of her entire 14-year career. Victoria Hale rose slowly to her feet. She stood there and Jordan watched her, and he waited to feel triumph. And he was surprised to find that what he felt instead was something closer to pity, because there was a version of this woman somewhere far back before the 98% had eaten her alive, who had gone to law school believing in something. And that version was standing in the ruins now looking at what she'd become. "Your Honor," she said, and her voice was flat and dead. "The government—" She stopped. She tried again. In light In light of the questions that have been raised regarding the integrity of the evidence, the government is not prepared to proceed at this time. Is not prepared to proceed, the judge repeated. Are you moving to dismiss Ms. Hale, or are you asking for a continuance so you can find a way to keep prosecuting an innocent woman? The cruelty of it was surgical. He was not going to let her hide behind soft language. He was going to make her say it. Victoria Hale closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, something had gone out of her, some final thing. The government moves to dismiss the charges against Angela Hayes, she said. The courtroom exploded. It was not a polite murmur this time. It was a roar. People came to their feet. Someone shouted. A reporter bolted for the doors. The judge hammered the gavel again and again, ordering order. But for a moment there was no order to be had, because a room full of strangers had just watched something they would tell their families about for the rest of their lives, and they could not hold it in. Jordan Hayes stood in the middle of it perfectly still, and he did not move, and he did not smile, and he watched his mother's face because that was the only thing in the room he cared about. Angela Hayes had not moved either. She sat with her hands over her mouth, and she was shaking her head slowly back and forth, the way people do when a thing is too big to fit inside them. Dismissed. The word hadn't landed yet. It was too large. 8 months of terror, of nights in a cell, of being made into a story about a criminal, of watching her son destroy his own future to fight for her. And now, in a single word from the mouth of the woman who'd tried to destroy her, it was over. Order, the judge said one final time, and this time the room obeyed, settling into a tense electric quiet. The government has moved to dismiss, Judge Ellison said. Before I rule on the manner of that dismissal, I want to be extremely precise because it matters, and it's going to matter to Ms. Hayes for the rest of her life. He looked down at Jordan. Mr. Hayes, you've studied this. You know there's a difference. Tell the court what you're asking for. Jordan understood exactly what the judge was doing. He was giving him this, the last word. He was letting the boy who'd been laughed out of his own courtroom on Tuesday be the one to say the words on Friday. Your Honor, Jordan said, and his voice was clear, and it carried to every corner of the silent room. There are 2 kinds of dismissal. A dismissal without prejudice means the charges are dropped, but the government can refile them later. It leaves the door open. It means my mother would have to live the rest of her life knowing that on any morning they could knock on her door again. He paused. I'm asking for dismissal with prejudice. With prejudice means the charges are gone, forever. It means the government cannot ever refile them. It means the door closes and it stays closed and my mother never has to be afraid again. He looked up at the judge. After what's been proven in this courtroom, Your Honor, she's earned that door closing. She's earned never being afraid again. Judge Robert Ellison looked at Jordan Hayes for a long moment, and then he nodded once. So do I, he said. He picked up his gavel. He held it for a moment, and the whole room held its breath with him. The charges against Angela Hayes, he said, are dismissed, with prejudice. The gavel came down, and Angela Hayes made a sound that Jordan would remember for the rest of his life, a sound that wasn't quite a sob and wasn't quite a laugh. The sound of a woman who has been holding her breath for 8 months, finally letting it go. She folded forward over the rail, and her shoulders shook, and the marshal standing near her, a big, quiet man who had watched the whole thing, reached down and gently, without a word, unlocked her handcuffs and took them off her wrists. She was free. She stood up and she turned and she looked for her son, and Jordan was already coming toward her, and there was no rail between them anymore. No glass, no slot, no phone, nothing. And Angela Hayes grabbed her boy and pulled him into her and held on like she was never going to let go. And Jordan Hayes, who had been calm and cold and clear for 8 straight months, who had not let himself feel a single thing, because feeling it might make it slip away, finally let go, and he put his face down against his mother's shoulder, and he cried. I told you. He managed his voice breaking against her. I told you to trust me. I told you to hold on. I did, baby, Angela whispered into his hair, rocking him the way she had when he was small. I did. I held on. You brought me home. You brought your mama home. Around them, the courtroom was in chaos. Reporters shouting questions, people crying. the judge already conferring with the marshals about Victoria Hale, who sat alone at the prosecution table, with her head bowed, no longer a shark, no longer a legend, just a woman watching the wreckage of everything she'd built. But Jordan didn't see any of it. For one long moment there was nothing in the entire world except his mother's arms and the smell of her and the impossible, unbelievable fact that it was over and she was free and he had done it. It was 11:17 in the morning, 8 months and 11 days after 2 federal agents had taken Angela Hayes away from her home in front of her neighbors. Her son had brought her back. And it was not quite finished. There were still assets to be returned. There was still a formal investigation to be opened. There was still the matter of what would happen to Victoria Hale and to the ordinance that had been used to crush an innocent woman, and to a system that had come within one 19-year-old boy of putting a laundry worker in prison for 2 decades for a crime a stranger committed in another state. But those were things for the days to come. Right now in this courtroom, in this moment, a mother held her son, and neither one of them let go, and outside the tall windows of the federal building, the Chicago morning went on exactly as it always had, indifferent and gray and ordinary, with no idea at all that inside those walls something had just been made right, that everyone had been so sure would go wrong. Jordan lifted his head. Over his mother's shoulder across the emptying courtroom, his eyes found Victoria Hale one last time. She was looking back at him, and for a moment the two of them just looked at each other. The boy she'd called Reddit educated, the boy she'd told to sit down before he embarrassed his mother, and the woman who had known the truth and buried it. She didn't say anything. There was nothing left to say. Jordan didn't say anything either. He just held his mother a little tighter, and he turned his back on Victoria Hale, and that was the last thing he ever gave her. Not anger, not a speech, just his back, and the sight of a family she'd tried to destroy, standing together unbroken in the middle of the courtroom where she'd been so certain she would win. By that evening, Jordan Hayes was famous, and he hadn't done a single thing to make it happen. The video was everywhere by 6 o'clock. A courtroom sketch artist had captured the moment Jordan held up Exhibit 99, and one of the reporters had recorded audio on a phone, and by dinner time, the clip was on every news channel in the city and climbing fast across the country. 19-year-old college dropout representing his own mother. Federal prosecutor caught committing perjury on the stand. Charges dismissed with prejudice. It was the kind of story that people share before they've even finished watching it, the kind that makes strangers text each other and say, "You have to see this." Jordan didn't watch any of it. He was in a diner on the South Side with his mother, and Angela Hayes was eating a cheeseburger and crying every few minutes for no reason at all, and Jordan was watching her eat, and that was the only thing in the world he wanted to be doing. "Stop looking at me like that," Angela said, wiping her eyes with a paper napkin. "You're going to make me cry again." "You're already crying, Mama." "That's your fault, too." She laughed, wet and shaky, and reached across the table and grabbed his hand. 8 months I ate that food in there. 8 months. You know what I dreamed about, not steak. Not nothing fancy. I dreamed about a cheeseburger from this exact diner, this exact one, because your father used to bring us here when you were little before he... She trailed off and squeezed his hand. "You remember that?" "I remember. You were maybe 5. You'd get the grilled cheese and you'd eat it in a circle all around the edges, saving the middle for last." "I still do that," Jordan admitted, and Angela laughed again. And for a moment, the two of them just sat there, holding hands across a diner table, and the whole nightmare of the last 8 months felt very far away. Then Jordan's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then he stared at it. "What?" Angela said, catching the look on his face. "What is it?" "What now?" "It's an email," Jordan said slowly, "from the dean of the law school at the University of Chicago." The trouble hadn't ended in the courtroom. Jordan knew that even sitting there with his mother and her cheeseburger, because a case doesn't just end when the gavel comes down. There's a machine underneath it, and the machine has to grind through everything the verdict set in motion, and the machine was only just beginning to turn. The first grind came the next morning, Saturday at 9 o'clock, when Jordan's phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Hayes," a woman's voice said. "My name is Diane Castellano. I'm the chief of the Public Corruption Unit at the U.S. Attorney's Office. I'd like to talk to you about Victoria Hale." Jordan sat down slowly at his kitchen table, under the little wooden cross by the sink. The same office that prosecuted my mother. The same office, Diane Castellano said, and there was something careful in her voice, something that understood exactly how that sounded. Mr. Hayes, I'm not going to insult you by pretending this is comfortable. My office charged your mother. My colleague buried evidence and lied under oath to convict an innocent woman. I understand if you never want to speak to anyone from this building again. She paused. But I'm the person whose job it is to make sure Victoria Hale answers for what she did. And I can't do it alone. So I'm asking, will you help me? Jordan looked out the window at the gray Saturday street. Part of him wanted to say no. Part of him wanted to hang up the phone and take his mother somewhere far away and never think about the federal government again as long as he lived. But there was another part. The part that had sat in the library basement at 3 a.m. The part that had asked in that courtroom what's to stop them doing it to anybody's mother. And that part knew that if he walked away now, if he took his win and went home, then Victoria Hale would be one bad prosecutor who got caught once and nothing would change, and the next Angela Hayes would have no Jordan. What do you need from me? He said. What Diane Castellano needed, it turned out, was everything. Because the case against Victoria Hale was not as it had seemed in the courtroom a slam dunk. The email and the perjury were damning, but Hale had already hired one of the best defense attorneys in the city, a silver-haired veteran named Marcus Webb, and Webb was already building exactly the wall Jordan had predicted she'd build. Clerical error, overwhelming caseload, an honest mistake by a dedicated public servant seized upon by a grieving family and a media circus. She's going to say she never saw the Okafor email, Diane told Jordan on Monday in a conference room downtown 3 days after the dismissal. She's going to say it went to a shared inbox, that it got lost, that with her caseload, it's plausible she never read it. And a jury might believe her because it is plausible, because prosecutors really do drown in email. But Okafor came to her office, Jordan said. The badge scan proves he was in this building. Webb will say Okafor talked to an assistant, that he never actually saw Hale, that the whole in-person conversation is Okafor misremembering, or worse, lying, because he's got his own reasons to want to look like a whistleblower. Diane leaned forward. That's why I need you to understand something, Mr. Hayes. What happened in that courtroom was extraordinary, but it was theater. It was enough to free your mother. It is not by itself enough to convict Victoria Hale of a federal crime. For that, I need more. Jordan was quiet for a moment, and then the cold, clear thing moved through him again, the thing that saw patterns, and he asked the question that changed the whole investigation. You said the Okafor email went to a shared inbox, he said, but it was also copied directly to her personal address. I saw the header, so if she's going to claim she never read the copy that came to her personally, he looked up. Then there'd be a record of that, wouldn't there? Whether an email was opened. Read receipts, server logs, the same kind of logs you all told me didn't matter when I tried to use them to save my mother. Diane Castellano went very still. The federal email system logs read status, Jordan continued, and his voice was picking up speed now, the pattern opening in front of him. It logs when a message is opened from what device at what time. If Victoria Hale opened that email 11 months ago, the system knows. It's sitting on a server right now. And if she opened it and then went forward with the prosecution anyway and then testified under oath that she never received it, that's not a clerical error. That's not a lost email in a shared inbox. That's a woman who read the truth, understood it, and chose to bury it. He paused. You don't need Okafor's word against hers. You've got the server. The server can't be intimidated. The server just tells the truth. Diane Castellano looked at the 19-year-old across the table from her, and slowly she began to smile. Mr. Hayes, she said, has anyone ever told you that you'd make a hell of a prosecutor? No, Jordan said. For a long time, people mostly told me I'd make a hell of a nuisance. She laughed, and then she stopped laughing because she'd realized he wasn't entirely joking. She'd read the trial transcript. She knew how the judge had spoken to him on Tuesday. She knew about the 11-minute meeting with the overworked public defender, the 8-year plea deal for a crime his mother didn't commit. She knew this boy had been drowning in a system that had decided he was nobody and had saved his mother anyway alone from the basement of a library. They were wrong, Diane said quietly. Whoever told you that? They were wrong about you. The server logs came back 9 days later. It was the second week now, the story still everywhere. Angela Hayes's face on magazine covers. She never asked to be on Jordan, turning down interview after interview, because he didn't want to be famous. He wanted to be left alone with his mother. But he took Diane Castellano's call the moment it came. "We got the logs," she said. Her voice was strange, tight. And the Okafor email was delivered to Victoria Hale's personal federal inbox 11 months ago at 4:18 in the afternoon, Diane said. It was opened at 4:22 the same afternoon, 4 minutes later, from her office workstation. It was open on her screen for 6 minutes and 40 seconds. A pause. "That's not a glance, Mr. Hayes. That's not an accidental click. 6 minutes and 40 seconds is how long it takes to read something carefully, twice." Jordan closed his eyes. 6 minutes and 40 seconds. She'd read it. She'd read it twice, and then she'd charged his mother anyway. "There's more," Diane said, and now her voice dropped, and Jordan understood that she was about to tell him something she wasn't fully comfortable telling him. "When I pulled Hale's file to build the case, I didn't just look at your mother's prosecution. I looked at her whole record, the 98%. She stopped. "Mr. Hayes, I've been doing this work for 20 years, and when I saw her numbers, my first thought wasn't admiration. It was a question, because nobody wins 98% of the time, not honestly. The truth is too messy. Real cases fall apart, witnesses recant, evidence goes bad. A 98% conviction rate isn't a sign of a great prosecutor." She took a breath. "It's a sign of one who stopped losing on purpose." The room went cold around Jordan. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I've opened a review of every case Victoria Hale has tried in the last 14 years, Diane Castellano said, "because if she buried evidence to convict your mother, there is no reason on earth to believe your mother was the first. And I think, Mr. Hayes, I think when we start pulling those files, we are going to find other Angelas. People who took plea deals because they were scared. People sitting in prison right now who never had a 19-year-old in a library basement willing to read 3,000 pages to save them." Her voice was quiet and hard. "You didn't just free your mother. You may have just cracked open the worst prosecutorial misconduct case this district has seen in a generation." Jordan Hayes sat at his kitchen table, and he thought about that. He thought about the number 98 and all the pride Victoria Hale had taken in it and what that number really meant. Every point of it, a person. Every point of it, someone's mother, someone's son, someone's father, some of them guilty, sure, but how many not? How many buried the way his mother had almost been buried? "Then we find them," Jordan said. "All of them. Every one." "We," Diane said. "You said you couldn't do it alone." Jordan opened his eyes. "I read 3,000 pages to save one woman. I'll read 30,000 to save the rest of them. Where do we start?" There was a silence on the line. And then Diane Castellano said in a voice that had lost all its professional distance, "You start by finishing school, Mr. Hayes. You start by becoming exactly the thing this system needs more of and has far too little of. And when you're ready, when you've got the degree and the bar card and the standing to do it, right there will be a job waiting for you in my unit, and God help the Victoria Hales of the world when you get here." She paused. "But that's for later. For right now, there's someone you need to talk to, because the review turned up a name almost immediately, the very first case I pulled." "Who?" "A man named Terrence Bell, convicted by Victoria Hale 6 years ago. Wire fraud almost identical to your mother's case. He's serving 14 years in a federal facility in Indiana." Diane's voice was careful. "He always claimed he was innocent. He said his identity was stolen, that someone else used his accounts. Nobody believed him. He didn't have a Jordan. He had an overworked public defender who told him to plead, and he wouldn't, so he went to trial, and Victoria Hale buried him." A pause. "I pulled his discovery file this morning, Mr. Hayes, and there's a forensic report in it, from an outside analyst, flagging exactly the kind of external intrusion Okafor found in your mother's case." Another pause. "It was never turned over to his defense. It was buried, just like your mother's." Jordan couldn't speak for a moment. "He's been in prison for 6 years, he finally said, "for something he didn't do, And she knew. She knew, Diane confirmed. Jordan stood up from the kitchen table. He walked to the window. Outside, the Chicago afternoon was gray and ordinary, and somewhere out there in a cell in Indiana, a man named Terrence Bell had spent 6 years being told he was a liar, being told he was a criminal, being told nobody would ever believe him. 6 years, and the proof of his innocence had been sitting in a file the whole time, buried by the same woman for the same reason. Another point on the 98%, another life fed into the machine. "Does he know?" Jordan asked. "Does Terrence Bell know what we found?" "Not yet. I wanted to tell you first." Diane's voice softened. "Because here's the thing, Mr. Hayes. I can file the motions. I can start the legal process to overturn his conviction. But that takes months, maybe longer. And in the meantime, there's a man in a cell who spent 6 years thinking the whole world called him a liar and meant it." She paused. "You know what that feels like, better than anyone, to have the truth and have nobody listen. I thought maybe he should hear it from someone who understands, someone who beat it." Jordan looked out the window for a long time. "When can I see him?" he said. The prison in Indiana was a 2-hour drive, and Jordan made it 3 days later in a borrowed car on a cold, clear morning. It was the 3rd week now since the dismissal. The story had begun finally to fade from the news, replaced by whatever came next, the way it always is. But for Jordan, it wasn't fading. It was growing, getting bigger and darker and more important than one mother, one son, one courtroom. They brought Terrence Bell into the visiting room in a jumpsuit the same gray as the one Angela had worn, and Jordan felt something twist in his chest at the sight of it. Bell was maybe 50. He sat down heavily across the glass, and he picked up the phone, and he looked at Jordan with the flat, exhausted, wary eyes of a man who had learned over 6 years that hope was just a way of setting yourself up to be hurt again. "They said a kid was coming to see me," Bell said. "Said it was about my case. I almost didn't come out. I'm tired of people coming to talk about my case." His voice was rough with disuse. "You a law student or something? You writing a paper on me?" "No, sir," Jordan said. "My name is Jordan Hayes. 3 weeks ago my mother was on trial, same as you. Wire fraud she didn't do. Same prosecutor, Victoria Hale." Something flickered in Terrence Bell's dead eyes. Just a flicker. "Hale," he said quietly. "That woman." "She buried the evidence that proved my mother was innocent," Jordan said. "An outside report showing the real fraud came from a hacker. She hid it, and she prosecuted anyway." He leaned forward close to the glass. "Mr. Bell, I've seen your file. Your discovery. There's a report in it. An outside forensic analyst 6 years ago flagged the exact same thing in your case. An external intrusion. Stolen identity. Proof it wasn't you." His voice was steady, but it took everything he had to keep it steady. "It was never given to your defense. She buried yours too, same as my mother's, 6 years ago." Terrence Bell did not move. For a long moment, he just sat there, the phone pressed to his ear, staring at Jordan through the glass. And then something began to happen to his face, something Jordan would never forget as long as he lived. The flat, exhausted wariness began to break apart, and underneath it was 6 years of a man screaming into a void that no one had believed, no one had listened, no one had cared. And now finally on the other side of a pane of glass was a 19-year-old boy telling him the thing he had been telling everyone for 6 years. It was true. He wasn't a liar. He never had been. "Say it again," Terrence Bell whispered. His hand was shaking so badly he could barely hold the phone. "Say it again, slow. I need to hear you say it again." "It wasn't you," Jordan said, slow and clear, looking the man dead in the eyes. "There was proof. She hid it. You were telling the truth the whole time, Mr. Bell, the whole time. And we're going to prove it, and we're going to get you out of here. I promise you. I don't make promises I can't keep. Ask my mother." His own voice broke now, finally, at the end. "We're going to bring you home." And Terrence Bell, a 50-year-old man who had not cried in 6 years because crying was a thing that got beaten out of you in a place like this, put his forehead against the glass and his shoulders started to shake, and he wept, and Jordan Hayes put his own hand flat against the glass on his side palm, out the way he had done for his mother in another visiting room a lifetime ago, and he held it there, and he did not pull it away. And through the glass, without a word, Terrence Bell lifted his shaking hand and pressed it against Jordan's palm to palm cold glass between them. 6 years, Bell wept. 6 years, and you the first person to believe me. A kid, a boy, 6 years. I believe you, Jordan said, and by the time we're done, so will everybody else. On the long drive back to Chicago that night, alone in the borrowed car with the highway humming under him and the dark fields of Indiana rolling past in the window, Jordan Hayes did the math, and the size of it took his breath away. 14 years, 98%, hundreds of cases, if even a fraction of them were like his mother's, like Terrence Bell's. Then there were people scattered across the whole federal prison system right now tonight, lying awake in cells, who did not do the things they were locked up for. People whose proof was sitting in a file somewhere buried waiting. People with no Jordan. And he understood somewhere on that dark highway that his life had changed in a way that had nothing to do with the fame or the news cameras or the scholarship offers piling up in his inbox. He understood what he was for now. He'd asked his mother once through a pane of glass whether he'd found the reason God made him the way he made him, strange pattern seeing, unable to let a wrong thing go. And she'd asked him back, "You find the reason yet, baby?" He had it now. It was Terrence Bell's hand against the glass. It was every buried file in every case Victoria Hale had ever won. It was the door he was going to spend the rest of his life prying open one name at a time. He drove home to his mother in the dark, and the whole way he didn't feel tired, and he didn't feel afraid, and he didn't feel alone. He felt for the first time in his whole strange life exactly like the thing he was supposed to be. He got home a little after 11 that night, and the light was still on in the kitchen. Angela Hayes was sitting at the table in her robe, a cup of tea gone cold in front of her, and Jordan knew before he even set his keys down that she'd been waiting up for him the whole time the way she used to when he was in high school and stayed out too late. "You didn't have to wait up, Mama." "Yes, I did," she said simply. "You went to see a man in a prison 2 hours away because of the same woman who tried to put me in one. You think I was going to be able to sleep?" She studied his face the way she always did reading him. "You look different. Something happened out there." Jordan sat down across from her. He didn't know how to say it, so he just said it plain. "He's been in there 6 years, Mama. Terrence Bell. 6 years for something he didn't do. And the proof he was innocent, it was sitting in a file the whole time. She buried his, too. Same as mine. 6 years ago." His voice caught. "And when I told him it wasn't him, and there was proof, he cried, 'Mama.' A grown man. He put his forehead on the glass, and he cried because I was the first person in 6 years to believe him." Angela Hayes was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and took her son's hands in both of hers. "You know what I kept thinking about those 8 months I was in there?" she said softly. "I kept thinking I'm lucky. Can you believe that I'm sitting in a cell for something I didn't do, and I'm thinking I'm lucky, because I had you, because I knew no matter what my boy was out here fighting for me, and he wasn't going to stop." Her eyes filled. "And then I'd lie awake at night and think about all the women in there with me who didn't have anybody, who did their whole sentence and nobody ever wrote them, nobody ever visited, nobody ever fought. And I'd think, Lord, what happens to the ones who don't have a Jordan?" She squeezed his hands. "And now you're telling me you found one, a man who didn't have anybody, and you're going to be his somebody." "I'm going to try." "You're not going to try," Angela said, and there was steel in it, the fierce mother steel from the courtroom. "You're going to do it, because that's what you do. You don't stop." She wiped her eyes and let out a shaky laugh. "Lord knows I tried to make you stop enough times. Told you to go back to school. Told you to take the deal. Told you not to throw your life away on me." She shook her head slowly. "Thank God you never listened to a word I said." Jordan laughed, and it turned into something else halfway through. And then the two of them were sitting at the kitchen table at 11 o'clock at night, holding hands and crying and laughing at the same time, the way people do when they've come out the other side of something that should have destroyed them and somehow didn't. The next morning, the 4th week, now the machine ground forward again, Diane Castellano called at 8. "Turn on the news," she said. Jordan turned on the news. And there was Victoria Hale on the courthouse steps being led inside by two federal agents, her silver-haired attorney Marcus Webb holding an umbrella over her against a light rain cameras, swarming reporters shouting questions she didn't answer. The banner across the bottom of the screen read, "Federal prosecutor indicted on perjury obstruction charges." "It happened this morning," Diane said in his ear. "Grand jury returned the indictment last night. Perjury, obstruction of justice, and deprivation of rights under color of law, which is the big one, Mr. Hayes. That's the charge for a government official who knowingly violates someone's constitutional rights. That's the charge that says she didn't just make a mistake. She used the power of her office to hurt an innocent person on purpose." A pause. "The server logs did it. 6 minutes and 40 seconds. Webb couldn't argue around it. You can argue a lost email in a shared inbox. You can't argue a message opened at her workstation on her screen for almost 7 minutes 11 months ago. The server told the truth just like you said it would." Jordan watched Victoria Hale disappear through the courthouse doors, and he waited to feel something like satisfaction. And once again he was surprised by what he actually felt, which was a strange, heavy sadness. "Why aren't I happy?" he said half to himself. "I should be happy." "Because you're not the kind of person who enjoys watching someone get destroyed," Diane said quietly. "Even someone who deserves it. That's not a weakness, Mr. Hayes. It's the whole reason you should be doing this work, and she never should have. She enjoyed it, the winning, the crushing. She forgot there were people on the other end of that 98%. A pause. "You never forget it. You couldn't forget it if you tried. That's the difference between you and her, and it always will be." There was one more thing, though, that Jordan couldn't let go of. He'd been turning it over since the courtroom, and it wouldn't leave him alone. "Diane," he said, "can I ask you something off the record, just between us?" "Of course." "How does it happen?" Jordan said. "How does somebody become that? Because I keep trying to hate her, and I do hate what she did. I hate it more than I've ever hated anything. But there's a part of me that keeps wondering. She went to law school. Somebody once wanted to be a lawyer. Somebody once cared about the truth, or at least thought they did. How do you go from that to a woman who reads proof that a laundry worker is innocent and buries it and sleeps fine at night?" He paused. "I need to understand it. Because if I don't understand how it happens, how do I know it won't happen to me?" There was a long silence on the line. When Diane Castellano spoke again, her voice had changed. It was older somehow, wearier. "You want the honest answer," she said. "It happens one small compromise at a time. Nobody wakes up one morning and decides to become a monster. It's never that. The first time it's tiny. Maybe you've got a defendant you're sure is guilty, 99% sure, and there's one piece of evidence that muddies it, that would let a guilty man walk on a technicality. And you tell yourself, this person is guilty, I know they're guilty, and this little piece of paper is going to let them hurt somebody else. So you set it aside, just this once, for the greater good." Her voice was quiet. "And you win, and nothing bad happens. And the guilty person stays in prison where they belong. And you learned a lesson, didn't you? You learned that the rules are for people who aren't sure, and you were sure, so the rules don't quite apply to you the same way." She let it sit. "And the next time it's a little easier, and the time after that easier still. And you tell yourself every time that you're sure that you're on the side of the angels, that the ends justify it. Until one day you're a woman with a 98% conviction rate, looking at proof that an innocent woman is innocent, and you've been cutting that corner so long you don't even feel the knife anymore. You just do it, because you're sure. You're always sure." Jordan was silent. "You asked how you know it won't happen to you," Diane said. "I'll tell you exactly how. It's the question you just asked me. Victoria Hale stopped asking that question a long, long time ago. She stopped wondering if she could be wrong. She stopped feeling sick about the corners she cut. The day you stop asking whether you might be becoming her, that's the day you should quit. As long as it scares you, you're safe. It's the ones it stops scaring that you have to watch out for." A pause. "You're going to be fine, Mr. Hayes. You're going to be a lot better than fine. You asked the question. That's how I know." The words stayed with Jordan for a long time. They stayed with him through the weeks that followed as the machine ground on as Diane's review of Victoria Hale's 14 years began slowly to turn up more names. Not many at first. A trickle, but each one a person, each one a file that should have been turned over and wasn't. Each one a life that had been fed into the 98%. Terrence Bell's motion was filed in the 6th week. Diane called Jordan the morning it went in. "It's going to take time," she warned him. "These things always do. The court has to review the buried report, authenticate it, hold a hearing. Months, probably. I don't want you promising that man he'll be home by Christmas because I can't guarantee it, and he's been let down enough." "I already promised him we'd bring him home," Jordan said. "I'm not taking it back. I'll just tell him the truth, that it's slow, that the machine grinds slow. But we're grinding it. Every day we're grinding it. He needs to know somebody's out here grinding it every single day and not stopping." "You go see him a lot," Diane observed. It wasn't quite a question. "Every week," Jordan said. 2 hours there, 2 hours back, same as I used to do for my mother." He was quiet for a moment. "You know what he told me last time? He said the visits are the only thing that lets him sleep now. Because for 6 years he'd lie there and think nobody knew, nobody believed him. And now he lies there and thinks that boy's out there. That boy's grinding it. And he sleeps." Jordan's voice was rough. "I'm not going to let him lie there alone again, Diane. Not for one more week. Whatever it takes, however slow, I show up." "You know," Diane said, and there was something almost wondering in her voice. "Most people, they get a win like you got. They take it, and they go build their life. They earned it. Nobody would blame them. But you got your mother back, and instead of walking away from all this, you walked straight back into a prison of all places, every single week." A pause. "Why?" Jordan thought about it. He thought about the library basement at 3 in the morning. He thought about his mother's hand against the glass. He thought about Terrence Bell weeping with his forehead pressed to a pane of scratched plexiglass because a stranger finally said the words he'd been screaming into silence for 6 years. "Because I know what it feels like now," he said finally. "To have the truth in your hand and have nobody listen. To stand in a room full of people who've already decided who you are and watch them laugh at you for it. My mother lived it. I lived it in that courtroom for 4 days, and it's the worst feeling in the whole world, Diane. Worse than being scared, worse than being angry. It's the loneliest thing there is, knowing the truth and being alone with it." He took a breath. "So how do I walk away from a man who's been alone with the truth for 6 years? I can't. I know exactly how it feels, and nobody who knows how it feels should ever be able to walk away from it. That's the whole thing. That's everything. The people who can walk away are the ones who never really understood in the first place." Diane Castellano didn't say anything for a moment. When she did, her voice was thick. "Finish school, Mr. Hayes," she said. "Please, for all of them. The ones we've found and the ones we haven't yet. Go be the thing this system needs. Because I've been doing this 20 years, and I've met a lot of good lawyers, a lot of smart ones, a lot of ambitious ones. But I've met almost nobody who couldn't walk away." A pause. "You couldn't walk away if your life depended on it. And God knows we need more of those." That evening, Jordan sat at the kitchen table with the email from the dean of the University of Chicago Law School open on his phone. He'd read it a dozen times over the past weeks and hadn't answered it because answering it made it real, and part of him was afraid to make it real. Angela came and stood behind him and read it over his shoulder, and she put her hands on her son's shoulders, and she was quiet for a moment. "A full scholarship," she said softly. "The whole thing, room board, everything." She squeezed his shoulders. "The University of Chicago Law School wants to give my baby a full ride to become a lawyer." Her voice broke. "After everybody said you didn't belong in a courtroom, after that woman laughed at you, after that judge told you loyalty wasn't a law degree." She turned him around gently by the shoulders so she could look at his face. "You gonna answer them, baby? Or you gonna sit here and stare at it another 3 weeks like you've been doing?" "I don't know how to write back," Jordan admitted. "Every time I start, it feels too big, like it's not real, like they're gonna figure out they made a mistake and take it back." "Jordan Michael Hayes." Angela crouched down in front of him, took both his hands, looked him dead in the eye the way she had his whole life. "You listen to me. You are the least mistake anybody ever made. You hear me? A whole courtroom decided you were nothing, and you stood up alone and you brought your mama home, and you're out here right now bringing other people's mamas and daddies home too. There is no mistake. There's just a world that took 19 years and one impossible week to finally see what I saw the day you were born." Her eyes were streaming now. "So you write them back. You tell them yes. And you go be exactly who you are out loud, where the whole world can see it. Because the world needs a whole lot more of you, baby, and a whole lot less of her." Jordan looked at his mother kneeling on the kitchen floor, in her robe holding his hands, and he felt something break open in his chest that had been closed and clenched tight for 8 long months. And beyond closed, since a father called him strange when he was 7, closed through every lonely lunch and every professor's raised eyebrow and every person who'd looked at a quiet black kid who saw patterns and decided he was odd instead of gifted. He hit reply, and with his mother watching with her hands still holding his, he typed 2 words, and then he stopped, and he read them out loud, and his voice was steady. "I accept." Angela Hayes made a sound and pulled her son into her arms right there on the kitchen floor and held him and rocked him, and Jordan held her back, and outside the window, the ordinary Chicago night went on, indifferent as always, with no idea that inside a small apartment on the South Side, a mother and a son had just crossed over into the life they were always supposed to have, the one that had almost been stolen from both of them, the one a 19-year-old boy had refused against everything to let go. They stayed like that a long time. And when Jordan finally pulled back, he wiped his eyes and looked at his mother and said the thing that had been sitting in him all evening. "It's not going to stop Mama. You understand that, right? This isn't the end of it. Terrence Bell and whoever comes after him and law school and Diane's investigation. This is the rest of my life now. I found the thing I'm for." He searched her face. "Are you okay with that? Because it means I'm going to spend my whole life walking back into rooms like the one that almost took you, over and over." And Angela Hayes smiled at her son through her tears, that same tired, warm smile that had held his whole world together since before he could remember, and she said the truest thing she knew. "Baby," she said, "the day you were born, I looked at you, and I asked God why he made you so different from every other child I'd ever seen. So quiet, so serious, looking at everything like you were taking it apart in your head." She touched his face. "And I think he just answered me. Took him 19 years, but he answered me." She pressed her forehead to his. "He made you different because the world was going to need somebody who couldn't look away, and now you can't. And thank God for it." She smiled. "So, no, I'm not just okay with it. I've been waiting your whole life to find out what you were for. Go be it. Go be it loud." The trial of Victoria Hale began 4 months later on a cold morning in the same federal building where she had spent 14 years never losing. Jordan Hayes sat at the gallery this time, not at a table, not in the well of the court. In the second row beside his mother, an ordinary citizen come to watch, and the strangeness of that was not lost on him. The last time he'd been in a room like this, he'd been standing alone at a defense table, while a woman in an expensive suit told him to sit down before he embarrassed his mother. Now that woman sat at the defendant's table, and it was her turn to be looked at, her turn to be a story other people told about her. He'd thought he would feel vindicated. He didn't. He felt the same heavy sadness he'd felt on the courthouse steps months ago watching her led inside. Because a trial like this one wasn't a victory. It was a wound the whole system had to open up and look at the wound of what it had let one of its own do for 14 years, and there was nothing to celebrate in that. There was only the grim necessity of it. Diane Castellano tried the case herself. She was everything Victoria Hale had been, precise, patient, methodical, except that where Hale had built her cases like a bricklayer laying a wall to trap someone inside, Diane built hers like a person carefully, painfully laying out the truth so that no one could ever unsee it. She called Raymond Okafor. She called the FBI analyst who'd pulled the server logs. She put 6 minutes and 40 seconds up on a screen for the jury, and she let them sit with it. 6 minutes and 40 seconds, 11 months before Hale ever stood up to call Angela Hayes a criminal. And on the third day, Diane Castellano called Angela Hayes to the stand. Jordan watched his mother walk to the witness box, and his heart clenched because he knew what this cost her. She'd been terrified of this room for 8 months. It had nearly swallowed her whole. And now she was walking back into it voluntarily to sit in the same chair where she'd once sat accused and to tell the truth about what had been done to her. Angela Hayes was sworn in. She sat down. She folded her hands in her lap. And when Diane asked her gently to tell the jury what those 8 months had been like, Angela Hayes did not perform, and she did not exaggerate, and she did not reach for anything larger than the truth. She just told it. The arrest in front of her neighbors. The cell. The moment they told her they'd taken her apartment 19 years of her life before anyone had even heard her side. The 8-year plea deal for a crime she didn't commit. The visits with her son through a pane of glass. "And your son," Diane said. "Jordan, he represented you." "He did. Why him? Why not a lawyer?" Angela Hayes looked out into the gallery, and she found her son's face, and she spoke the rest of it to him. "Because he was the only one who wouldn't stop," she said. "The lawyer they gave me met me for 11 minutes and told me to plead guilty. 11 minutes for my whole life. And my boy read 3,000 pages. He dropped out of school and he didn't tell me. He slept in a library. He didn't stop, Your Honor, ma'am. He didn't stop because he's not built to stop. He never was. And I used to worry about that. I used to worry that the world would break a boy like that." Her voice trembled, but held. "And then the world tried. And he didn't break. He broke the thing that was trying to break us instead." The courtroom was silent. In the jury box, a woman was crying openly. "Ms. Hayes," Diane said quietly, "the defense is going to argue that what happened to you was a mistake, a clerical error, an overwhelmed prosecutor who lost track of one email in thousands. I have to ask you directly, do you believe it was a mistake?" And here Angela Hayes lifted her chin, and something came into her that had not been there in the old courtroom, the 8 months ago courtroom, where she'd been a frightened woman who couldn't understand what was happening to her. She wasn't frightened now. She'd been to the bottom of it and come back. "No," she said clearly. "I don't, and I'll tell you why. A mistake you feel bad about. A mistake when somebody shows you, you say, 'Oh Lord, what have I done?' and you try to fix it." She looked across the room at Victoria Hale, and it was the first time she'd looked at her directly since the day of the dismissal. "When a man came to her office and told her to her face that I was innocent, she didn't say, 'What have I done?' She told him to keep quiet. She looked at proof I was innocent for 6 minutes and 40 seconds, and then she took my home and she took my savings, and she stood up in front of God and everybody and called me a criminal." Her voice did not rise. It didn't need to. "That's not a mistake, ma'am. A mistake is an accident. What she did to me, she did on purpose every single step, and she'd have done it all the way to 20 years in a prison cell if my boy hadn't caught her. So no, I don't believe it was a mistake. I believe she knew exactly what I was. An innocent woman who folds sheets for a living, and she decided I was worth destroying to keep her record clean, and I'll believe that till the day I die." Victoria Hale did not look up. She sat at the defendant's table with her eyes on her folded hands, and she did not look up because there was nothing in that room she could bear to look at. The jury was out for 6 hours. Jordan and Angela waited on a bench in the marble hallway outside the courtroom side by side, not talking much the way you don't when the waiting is too big for words. Diane Castellano came out once and sat with them for a while and told them honestly that she didn't know which way it would go, that juries were unpredictable, that a sympathetic defendant with a good lawyer could always find one holdout. And Jordan nodded because he'd learned these last months that the machine grinds slow and the machine is never certain, and all you can do is put the truth in front of it and wait. At 4:17 in the afternoon, the jury came back. They filed in, and Jordan watched their faces the way he'd learned to watch faces looking for the pattern, and he couldn't read them, and his heart pounded. The foreman stood. The judge asked if they'd reached a verdict. The foreman said they had. "On the charge of perjury, how do you find guilty?" Jordan felt his mother's hand grip his. "On the charge of obstruction of justice, how do you find guilty? On the charge of deprivation of rights under color of law, how do you find—" There was the smallest pause, and then the foreman said the word that closed the last door. "Guilty." Victoria Hale closed her eyes. She did not cry. She did not react at all except to close her eyes, and Jordan understood that this was the sound of the 98% finally completely ending, not with a bang, but with a single quiet woman closing her eyes at a table while a room full of strangers watched her whole identity dissolve. Angela Hayes did not cheer. She did not smile. She just squeezed her son's hand, and Jordan squeezed back, and the two of them sat there in the second row and let it be over. Outside on the courthouse steps, the cameras were waiting, a wall of them, and reporters shouting Jordan's name because by now, the whole country knew who Jordan Hayes was, the boy who'd caught a corrupt prosecutor and freed his mother and cracked open a 14-year investigation. They wanted a quote. They wanted him to celebrate. They wanted him to spike the ball. Jordan stopped at the top of the steps, his mother beside him, and he looked out at the cameras, and for a moment he didn't say anything at all. And the reporters quieted because there was something in the boy's face that told them this wasn't going to be the quote they were expecting. "A lot of people want me to be happy today," Jordan said finally, "and I understand that. A guilty verdict, a corrupt prosecutor going to prison, an innocent woman cleared. It looks like a happy ending." He paused. "But I want to be honest with you because my mother raised me to be honest. I'm not happy. I'm relieved. Those aren't the same thing." He looked out at them, this quiet 19-year-old the whole world had almost never heard of. Because here's what today really means. It means the system worked this one time because a laundry worker happened to have a son who happened to see patterns and happened to have 8 months and nothing to lose. That's not justice. That's luck. My mother got justice because she got lucky. And a system where you need to be lucky to get justice is a system that's broken. His voice was steady and it carried out over the crowd. The law isn't supposed to crush people. It's supposed to protect them. And when it stops doing that, when it starts feeding innocent people into a machine to keep somebody's record clean, somebody has to fix it. It shouldn't have to be a 19-year-old in a library basement, but until it isn't, I guess it's going to have to be people like me. So no, I'm not celebrating today. I'm going back to work tomorrow because there are still people in cells who didn't do it, and they're still waiting, and they don't have 8 months, and a son who won't quit. They just have the truth, and somebody has to go and listen to it. He didn't take questions. He put his arm around his mother, and the two of them walked down the courthouse steps together and out into the ordinary afternoon. And behind them, the cameras kept rolling, and the clip of what he'd said would be watched by the end of that week by more people than had ever heard his name before. Victoria Hale was sentenced 8 weeks later. Jordan didn't go. He'd thought about it, and in the end, he'd decided there was nothing there for him. He read about it afterward. 7 years in federal prison. The judge, in his sentencing remarks, said that a prosecutor who abuses the public trust does more damage than any ordinary criminal because a criminal breaks the law, but a corrupt prosecutor breaks the very thing that's supposed to protect us from criminals. He said Victoria Hale had spent 14 years teaching the public that the system could not be trusted and that no sentence could undo that, but that the law would do what it could. Jordan felt no triumph reading it. He felt only the quiet closing of a chapter. And then he went back to work because Diane's investigation had by then turned up 11 names. 11 people convicted over 14 years in cases where exculpatory evidence had been buried. Not all of them innocent. It turned out the machine was messier than a clean story would have it, and some of the 11 had done the things they were convicted of even if the evidence had been mishandled. But some of them hadn't. Some of them were exactly like his mother, exactly like Terrence Bell. And each of the 11 got a review, now a real one, because a boy in a library basement had pulled the first thread and refused to let go. Terrence Bell walked out of the federal facility in Indiana on a bright morning in the spring, 14 months after Jordan first pressed his hand against the glass and promised to bring him home. Jordan was there. So was Angela. They drove the 2 hours in the early dark, and they stood in the parking lot outside the prison gates, and they waited. And when the doors finally opened, and Terrence Bell walked out into the daylight, a free man, for the first time in 6.5 years, blinking in the sun, a plastic bag of his belongings in one hand, he stopped, and he looked around like a man who couldn't quite believe the sky was real, and then he saw Jordan. He didn't say anything. He walked across the parking lot slow at first, and then faster, and he grabbed the boy who had believed him when no one else in the world would, and he held on, a 50-year-old man holding a 19-year-old like a drowning man holds the thing that pulled him out, and he wept into Jordan's shoulder, and Jordan held him and let him weep. "You came," Bell said over and over. "You said you'd come and you came. Every week you came. And now you're here. You're really here." "I told you," Jordan said, his own voice thick. I don't make promises I can't keep. We brought you home, Mr. Bell. You're home." Angela Hayes stood a little apart, watching her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face, and when Terrence Bell finally let go of her son and turned to her, she stepped forward and took both his hands in hers. This stranger, this man she'd never met, who had shared her exact nightmare, and the two of them looked at each other with a recognition that didn't need any words. The recognition of two people who had both been to the bottom of the same pit and both been pulled out by the same impossible boy. 6.5 years, Terrence Bell said to her. 8 months, Angela said. And I thought that was going to kill me. 8 months. I can't even imagine your 6.5 years. You don't have to imagine it, Bell said quietly. It's over. He ended it. He looked back at Jordan. That boy of yours ended it. They took Terrence Bell to the diner on the south side, the one Jordan's father used to take them to, the one Angela had dreamed about in her cell, and they bought him a cheeseburger, and they watched him eat his first meal as a free man, and it was, Jordan thought, watching the two of them, Terrence Bell and his mother, laughing, now telling each other the small human stories of two survivors, the best thing he had ever done. Not the courtroom, not catching Victoria Hale. This, a man eating a cheeseburger in the sun because a boy wouldn't stop. Jordan started law school that fall. He walked into his first class at the University of Chicago, a quiet young man who ate lunch alone and did his reading 3 weeks early, and this time when his classmates and professors looked at him, they didn't see a strange kid, and they didn't see a nuisance, and they didn't see a boy who didn't belong. They saw Jordan Hayes. Some of them had watched the clip on the courthouse steps. Some of them had chosen this school this year because of him, and the boy who had spent 19 years being told he was too different, too quiet, too odd, walked through the halls of a law school that had given him a full scholarship, and he understood finally and completely that the thing about him that the world had tried so hard to fix had never needed fixing. It had needed a reason. He found the reason his second year when the Innocence Project chapter at the school, the one he'd helped restart, took on its first case. A woman named Marisol Vega, convicted of arson 3 years into a 15-year sentence, insisting the whole time that the fire had been electrical, an accident that the state's expert had been wrong. Everyone had told her to stop saying it. And Jordan Hayes, 21, now sat across a table from her in a prison visiting room and said the words he had learned to say, the words that were his whole life now. "Tell me everything," he said. "Start at the beginning. I'm listening. I'm not going to stop until I understand, and I'm not going to stop after that either. So take your time. Tell me everything." And Marisol Vega, who had been telling the truth to a wall for 3 years, looked at this young man who was actually leaning forward, actually listening, actually writing it down. And something broke open in her face, the same thing that had broken open in Terrence Bell's. The impossible dawning realization that finally someone had come. The pattern Jordan had learned was always the same. The truth was always there. It was always sitting in some file, some log, some timestamp, some buried email waiting. It never went anywhere. It just waited for someone patient enough, stubborn enough, someone who couldn't look away to come and find it and drag it up into the light where it couldn't be buried anymore. Years later, a reporter doing a profile on him would ask Jordan Hayes the question everyone eventually asked. What made you do it? That first case, your mother alone, 19 years old, against a 98% conviction rate in a room full of people laughing at you. What made you think you could win? And Jordan, older now, a lawyer now with a wall full of cases behind him, and his mother's photograph on his desk, would think about it for a long moment. "I never thought I could win," he'd say. "That's the thing people get wrong about it. I didn't stand up in that courtroom because I was confident. I stood up because I was the only one left. Everybody else had already decided she was going to lose. The lawyer, the judge, the prosecutor. The whole system had already written the ending. And I looked at that, and I thought, somebody has to refuse to accept the ending everybody's already decided on. Somebody has to keep looking after everybody else has stopped." He'd pause. The prosecutor called me a Reddit-educated kid. She laughed at me in front of the whole room. And you know what? She was right that I didn't know the law the way she did. I really didn't. But she'd forgotten the one thing that mattered more than knowing the law. She'd forgotten what it was for. His voice would be quiet and certain. The law isn't a weapon for winning. It's a promise. It's a promise that if you're innocent, the truth will protect you. She broke that promise for 14 years to keep a number clean, and I refused to let the promise stay broken. That's all I ever did. I refused to let it stay broken. The reporter would ask one last question. Do you ever think about her? Victoria Hale and Jordan Hayes would look out the window for a moment, thinking about a woman who was by then long out of prison, disbarred, living a small, quiet life somewhere. Her name a cautionary tale taught in law schools, including his own. Sometimes, he'd say, I don't hate her anymore. I did for a while, but hate's a heavy thing to carry, and I've got too much work to do to carry it. He'd shake his head slowly. Mostly, I just think about all the corners she cut before she got to my mother. All the times she was sure and set the truth aside just this once, and won, and nothing bad happened until it became who she was. And then I think about the question I ask myself every single day before I walk into a courtroom or a prison visiting room. Could I be wrong about this? Could I be missing something? Am I sure, or do I just want to be sure? He'd meet the reporter's eyes. She stopped asking that question a long time before she ever met my mother. And I decided that day on the courthouse steps that the day I stop asking it is the day I quit. Because the moment you stop wondering if you could become her, you've already started to. And it was true. Every word of it was true. And Jordan Hayes lived it for the rest of his life. One case at a time, one buried truth at a time, one person nobody else would listen to at a time. He never became famous the way the internet briefly made him famous. The clips faded the way they always do. Most people forgot the name of the boy who caught the prosecutor, but the people he pulled out of the dark never forgot it. Terrence Bell named his first grandson Jordan. Marisol Vega, freed after 4 years, went to school and became a paralegal and spent her own life helping the wrongly convicted, and told everyone who asked that she did it because a young man once leaned forward and said, "Tell me everything, I'm listening." The reason rippled outward past Jordan, past the people he saved, into the people they saved, the way a single stubborn refusal to accept a broken promise can if you let it become a flood. Angela Hayes never went back to the hospital laundry. She didn't have to, but she kept the little wooden cross by the kitchen sink, and she kept a photograph on the wall. The courtroom sketch from that first trial, the one of her son holding up Exhibit 99, and whenever anyone asked her about it, she'd tell them the whole story from the beginning, the arrest and the cell and the 8-year plea deal and the boy who wouldn't stop, and she'd always end it the same way, the way only a mother could. The whole world looked at my son and saw a strange, quiet boy who didn't belong, she'd say. The court mocked him. The prosecutor laughed at him, and minutes later, that same boy stood up and changed the law and brought his mama home. She'd touch the photograph gently. They were all so busy laughing that they never once stopped to ask the only question that mattered. They never asked what a boy like that might be for. Her voice would fill with the fierce, quiet pride of a woman who had known the answer since the day he was born. Well, now they know. And so does every innocent soul he's pulled out of the dark since. My son was never the one who didn't belong in that courtroom. He was the only one who ever truly did. And that was the truth of it. The whole truth, the kind that waits patiently in the dark until someone stubborn enough comes to drag it into the light. A broken system for one shining moment, and then for a lifetime of moments after, was forced to show what it had buried. A corrupt prosecutor fell. Innocent people walked free. And it all began, every bit of it, because one young man the entire world had written off refused absolutely and forever to accept the ending everyone else had already decided on. They laughed at Jordan Hayes, and then he changed the law and saved his mother and never stopped saving people for the rest of his life. That is how you answer the ones who laugh.